Good evening, folks. I'd like to call to order the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District Board of Directors for May 16th. Can I get a roll call?
Good evening. Vice President Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Director Matt Sampson,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
and President Monty Schmidt.
Here. Can I get a motion to adopt our agenda?
So moved. Second.
Are there any comments, public comments on items not on the agenda?
There are none. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, there is one, a few. So hold on, please. Let me go ahead and first, let me put on the timer so that we have that ready.
So I'm sorry, President Schmidt, I think we just want to see if there's comments on the adoption of the agenda and then public comment
Sorry.
on items not on the agenda.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you. Sorry
thank
about
you.
that.
No problem.
Comments
Yes.
on the agenda?
There are two comments on the agenda. That is Mimi Willard and just Mimi Willard. Oh, I'm sorry. No more. There are none.
Okay, then can we get a roll call vote?
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson, Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye. Okay,
Thank you.
now could we get, are there any public comments on items not on the agenda?
That is correct. I have Miss Mimi Willard. And for some reason, my Blue Sky timer is not yet working, but I have her here. So Miss Willard, let me unmute you. And then after Miss Willard is Mr. Clayton Smith. Go ahead, Miss Willard.
Before you set the timer that isn't showing, can you tell me what the time allocation is, please?
I'm sorry, what time we started?
No, what time, how much time is?
Oh,
the
3 minutes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So after the likely outcome of tonight's hearing, most residents should expect to soon see big increases in their water bills unfolding over the 4-year period. And I want to just comment now that I think it's really important that the district do its utmost to ensure that the dollars that are coming from ratepayers in this cycle are focused on funding the key priorities that will be outlined tonight and not be squandered. And it's really imperative, I think, that you commit to focus your spending to eliminate excesses and also to move away from any projects that aren't clear winners. So with that in mind, I have 4 suggestions. 5, sorry. Number 1, total compensation per average employee, including healthcare, pension, and overtime, exceeded $200,000 in 2022. I suggest that in your new labor and management contracts that you try to hold the line so that you're not increasing total compensation for those who are among your higher paid employees, where let's say draw the line at 225,000 and not increase those folks. Number 2, stop paying for health insurance for anyone over age 65, including directors such as Larry Russell. Medicare is an excellent program. I can testify to that, and it's good enough for us ratepayers. Number 3, raise the bar for early retiree healthcare benefits. Now employees can qualify for it with as little as 5 years of service at age 50. 4, the district contributes to 2 defined benefit plans, Social Security and CalPERS. New employees should not receive more retirement benefits than CalPERS alone would provide for them at comparable agencies. And 5th and finally, water supply investments must be vetted against each other as the best use of capital, and then be chosen on that basis. I would submit that has not been done yet for smart meters, which is now in your 4-year plan, but it should be removed, as East Bay Mud recently did. At East Bay Mud, they did an independent assessment of their pilot program over a several-year period and showed it to be financially a loser. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Mr. Clayton Smith?
Yeah, I put my own timer on my watch.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah. This has to do with the recent cooling for this month of May. We, according to what I can see, we're running about 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit colder than the average temperatures in Marin, certainly Mill Valley. As I looked at Google and then have been following the temperatures. And that also is something I noticed is becoming a topic of conversation in town, even over coffee down at the equator today. And that brought up in my mind, of course, this looks like a success for the geoengineers with all their aerosoling of the atmosphere over the Bay Area, which is a part of this program that they're doing to cool the planet by basically reflecting the sunlight back into space away from the surface. But that brings up a couple of issues. One of them has to do with the issue of evaporation and the use of the evaporation metric as a possible addition to your water supply situation there. And I'd like to know if anyone there actually measures evaporation on your reservoirs. And if we could have that information, it might actually confirm in an empirical way much of what I've been speculating on about this geoengineering project that's been going up in the air over our environment for the last at least 3 or 4 years. And the other thing is we had the fire marshal at the Board of Supervisors this afternoon talking about all of his stuff around the fire load on the wildlands of Marin. And of course, you are the people who have, I think, the majority of the wildlands that are adjacent to the housing in the county. And I remember way back when this was being discussed earlier, that there was an absence of actually a human being manning the tower up on top of Mount Tam. And I didn't have a chance to bring this up to the fire chief of Marin, but I would like to bring it up here because if we don't have that allocated in the budget that's coming up, I hope it's worth a mention, given the fire load that we're going to have from all the excess rain that occurred during this rainy season. We're going to have a big bunch of grass to deal with. So anyways, those are a couple of thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Mr. Jim Beckham, then next I have Mr. Jim Beckham, and then Ed Jamison and Ted. So Mr. Beckham, please.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. First of all, I was under the impression that this meeting was an opportunity for public commentary on the proposed rate increases, but you launched into the meeting without telling us what the agenda was, and in fact took a vote on the agenda already. So I was asking to comment on the exorbitant rate increases that are being proposed. I would like to request.
I'm sorry, sir, there will be an opportunity to comment specifically on the rates, the rate proposal later in the meeting. This is just general public comment on items not on the agenda.
Mr. Ed Jamison, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I'd just like to reinforce what Mimi Willard had to say about MMWD's early retirement and healthcare spending for retirees. These benefits are nowhere near what public and private companies provide, and such benefits should not be provided to MMWD's new employees. The unfunded pension liabilities cannot be reversed, but the financial hole needs to be plugged. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker is Ted, please.
Basically, I was going on the same type of thing. I noticed in the 8-page announcement for this meeting, the unfunded liabilities for pensions was not mentioned anywhere. And I was just wondering if any of the new rate increase is going to be directed towards that. And if not, how is the unfunded pensions going to be addressed?
Thank you. And then next is Jess.
Hi, I'm actually, this is related to the rate increases, but more about public process, and I'm not going to be available later. So I just wanted to mention, this is related to the hard copy responses required. I reached out and received a response that it's part of the law that you guys have to get hard copy responses. That's from a 1996 27-year-old law that was pre-internet. So that may be the case, but I want to know why, when you have a public hearing like this, you can't consider emails, which everybody uses now instead of snail mail, as well as our public comments tonight, as town councils and city councils everywhere do that and rely on that to inform their decision making. And there's no way for me to know how our paper letters were counted or dropped off. We actually dropped ours off in person and had to go to a night drop-off area. It was very weird. It was not clear. So it seems like it's very hard for the public to get in touch with you guys and give feedback on something like the rate increases, and that needs to be made more fair and more of a democratic process, just like it is for all other public hearings. And I want to make sure those comments are being counted.
Thank you, Jess. And I have no further speakers.
Okay, thank you. All right, that brings us to directors and general managers announcements. I'll maybe start to my left, Director Russell.
None for me.
Ranjit.
I just wanted to note that last week, Kate Collins, the mayor of San Rafael, signed a pledge to join an annual national water conservation effort. This is called the Wyland National Mayor's Challenge for Water Conservation. It's a competition between cities to exercise conservation practices, and it involves mayors challenging residents to conserve water, energy, and other resources on behalf of their city through online pledges. It's a compelling initiative. I'm wondering if we're connecting with Kate Collins on this and, able to support her in some way, or at least help her get the word out.
No, not tonight. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to our consent calendar. Can I get a motion to adopt our consent calendar?
So moved.
I'll second with a quick discussion on item number 3. We could do that.
Okay. Do we have any public comments on the consent calendar?
There are none.
I'm sorry, did you have questions on that?
I had just a comment on it.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be pulled, but if I can make that now, if that would be appropriate.
Yes, Director Sampson, that would be
So,
appropriate.
Number 3, item on the consent calendar just deals with the increase in chemicals we're facing. I thought it was appropriate tonight to highlight this, that there's a 40% increase in year-over-year cost of the chemicals we're using to treat the water. And it just goes to show you the inflation impacts that we're feeling as a district, and using those touch points to inform what we're doing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben, do you have any announcements?
None tonight, President Schmidt.
Okay, that brings us to that we'll have a vote on the consent calendar.
Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to our regular agenda item number 4, future meetings and scheduled agenda items.
Thank you. That's me. So we have, okay, well, I'm going to do this by memory. So next week we have 2 meetings. We have the closed session on Tuesday, the 23rd at 5 p.m. Then on next Thursday, thank you. Next Thursday, we have the Finance and Administration Committee meeting, but also I forgot an important one coming up this Friday is the Operations Committee meeting at 9:30. And then on May 30th, we have the Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting at 9:30 instead of tomorrow, because that was changed. And then 2 upcoming external meetings are the NBWA on June 2nd, as well as the Lagunitas Creek TAC meeting also on June 2nd. So just wanted to remind the board that, and that's all I have.
I got a little confused, Terry.
Sure.
Where'd the Thursday meeting come from?
The Thursday meeting is the FAC next week at 9:30.
So it's not on the list, or it is on the list?
I'm looking at the agenda.
I am too.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't have the Thursday. I apologize, but there is a Finance and Administration Committee meeting next Thursday.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, that brings us to our public hearing. And we will make some announcements here about the public hearing. Before we open it, I want to just let folks know that we really appreciate all the effort that folks have made to come here in person. And then we have also a number of folks who are attending via Zoom. And we want to make time for folks to provide comments, but we also want to be respectful for the fact that we may have a lot of comments. And if the evening gets very late, it gets very hard for folks to be able to provide comments. So at the outset here, we want to set a limit on comments for 2 minutes. We're hoping that provides enough time for folks to be able to offer their thoughts, and yet also won't have the evening go so late that it'll make it hard for other folks to tune in. If we do get a very significant number of people attending virtually, we may drop down to 1 minute per comment, but we'll see how attendance goes and if that's necessary, again, just to make it fair for folks to be able to participate. So Terry, our board secretary, is going to be holding the timer for us to help us stay on track. So please try to be respectful of the timer and to keep your comments to 2 minutes. If somebody else has already made a comment about something, we're listening to all comments, we're tracking them. And if somebody has already made a point that you were going to make subsequently, you don't need to repeat that comment if you don't want to. Just know that whether 1 or 10 people make that same comment, we are going to track that and be responsive to that. Let's see here. If you are here in person, please fill out a card and provide it to Terry, our board secretary, so that she can call you. And if you are on Zoom, we ask you to please raise your hand and keep it up until we've called on you. Also, during your comments, the board will not be responding to comments and questions during your comments. We're going to let everybody provide comments. We're going to be tracking those comments. After all the public comments are completed, we will be taking a short 10-minute break, wherein staff is going to have a moment to gather together and develop some responses to questions so that we can then at that point come back and we'll be responsive to your questions. And with that, the public hearing is now open.
Presentation.
Okay. Yeah, presentation.
Okay. President Schmidt and board members, staff has prepared a presentation for tonight that includes providing some background and context, reviewing the process that we've undertook over the past 6 months in developing this proposal for tonight, the opportunities provided by the proposed investments in the water system, and reviewing the impact of the rate increases to our customers, among other items. We'll have a brief background. We'll talk about financial challenges and opportunities, the rate setting process and outreach, and the proposed rate structure. Let's keep going. We are, as we do note, the oldest municipal water district in California, well over 100 years old. We serve about 200,000 people. And as a public agency, as a water district, we only charge customers the cost of providing the service. About 8 billion gallons of water are delivered to our customers each year, Most of it, roughly 75%, comes from our 5 reservoirs or lakes on Mount Tam. And then we have 2 off mountain lakes as well. So it takes a lot to bring water to your tap. The 24/7 operations, day or night, 365 days a year, we treat the water. A complex distribution system tests the water to ensure it's safe, respond to main breaks or any emergencies that may come up. We also manage our watershed with an emphasis certainly on water quality and maintaining the high level water quality we're fortunate to have in this community, as well as a focus on wildfire resiliency and veg management and forest and creek restoration. A lot of the work is going on in support of the biodiversity of the mountain, but with a focus on water quality. Water system care and improvements, that's the day-to-day maintenance, the system improvements, and the investments, which is a key part as we think about water system resiliency or reliability. Infrastructure is really first and foremost in all the customer service and outreach programs we provide. There's a lot that goes into delivering water. We have 3 treatment plants. You may know 22,000 acres of watershed, 7 lakes, reservoirs, almost 1,000 miles of pipe, and it goes on. It's a very complex system generally, but particularly for the size of this district. When we were beginning this process around 6 months ago, we established some goals that we were wanted to accomplish as part of this. The first one is strengthen our water supply resiliency, reliability in the face of climate change and extreme droughts, both on the demand side through conservation and looking at the supply side as well to augment that. Also building on wildfire resiliency and biodiversity enhancements in the watershed, which is something we're very focused on and continue to make advancements. Keeping pace with inflation. We heard tonight, we passed an item, over 40% increase in our water treatment chemicals, which is really just an example of many similar inflationary driven issues we're dealing with. And replenishing our reserves. And you'll hear tonight, we were in great shape for reserves as this recent drought started, and we used a lot of it given the really as anticipated, but we do need to replenish it to bring it back to where it was. The focus areas for as we went into this is updating the rate model to reflect current demand patterns with our customers that have changed over time. We wanted to, if we could, and you'll see tonight, we were successful in this, to reduce fixed fees as a percentage of customer bills. The higher the fixed fees, it hits disproportionately lower water users, and use the volumetric charge to increase for the enhanced funding. Wanted to simplify the rate structure with a focus to encourage conservation, give customers greater control on their monthly bill, and eliminate the seasonal tiers for residential customers that align with a conservation emphasis, and apply a long-term lens to this that includes incorporating drought rates. So in the next drought, we'll be well prepared to deal with the financial implications that can come with droughts and reduced demand. Here, this is looking at a low, mid, and high water user, this graph, and it shows the increase if we look at the median or the typical water users from 139, this is bi-monthly bills, to 171. So approximately a 50 cent per day increase for the typical customers, less of an increase percentage wise in dollars for the lower water users, and similarly higher for the higher water users. This these pie charts illustrate that our fixed fees today are a little over 60% for a typical residential customer's bill. And the proposal before you tonight brings it down to 47%. And you'll see later on in the presentation in the out years, that number goes a bit further down. And so the 171 is the proposal tonight. This is a 4-year rate increase proposal, and there's less significant relative to year one, but smaller increases in the out years of the 4-year rate increase. And Marin Water is unique, and that does drive some of our financial challenges as we look at rate structure and rate process. One, the topography. Of course, part of the beauty of living in Marin is the hills and valleys. That requires a lot of pump stations and tanks to deliver the water to that terrain. We have, relative to others in the Bay Area, a low density. And so we don't get economies of scale in our infrastructure compared to most other water agencies that we look at comparing ourselves with. And slow growth, and that comes in, many water agencies have benefited over the last 20 years or so with growth, and the connection fee revenue has been a significant part of their overall revenue stream. It just so happens in Marin, we don't have that sort of growth. We noted we're the oldest water agency. Yeah, that's okay. And we don't rely on the Sierras or the State Water Project. Again, those big water projects have a big economies of scale that we happen not to benefit from. This is kind of a pictorial of our infrastructure per capita or per person, if you think about it. And you can see, you know, with the pipes, we're the highest. We really dwarf folks once we look at tanks and pumps, almost a 4 or 5-fold for many comparable agencies. And that cost is borne by our customers, by our rate base. And again, it's driven by the unique topography in our service area in Marin County. So with that, I'll hand over to our finance director, our CFO, Brett Uppendahl, to continue the presentation. Brett.
Thank you very much, Ben, and good evening, board. As Ben mentioned, my name is Brett Uppendahl. I'm the district's finance director. And tonight I'm going to provide you an overview of our financial challenges we face, as well as some opportunities we have to fund in this upcoming rate period. The slide you see before you is just a context for what we're building off of. This is our current budget, our fiscal year 22-23. You can see our overall budget when you add operating and capital comes out to a little over $100 million, 112 as it says on the slide. Our operating fund is the majority of our expenses. That covers our day-to-day operations and expenses, as well as our debt service for capital projects. Our capital fund currently is around $20 million. And that is largely dedicated to our capital improvement program, which covers the ongoing replacement of many of those infrastructure pieces that Ben just mentioned in terms of pipelines and tanks. It also allows for improvements over time to our dam spillways and treatment plants. We've invested heavily recently in fire hardening for critical facilities in the watershed. And we also would fund water supply reliability projects from this fund. When you take that and you put it into our financial plan, and this is kind of what builds the beginning kind of building blocks for the rate structure, it comes out like you see on the screen in front of you. So operations, again, on the top, about $80 or $90 million going forward. We are seeing about a 10% increase there in operations in the first year, followed by more inflation-based increases in the out years. And as we talked about, this first year is a little bit of a catch-up as we adjust our budget and our rate structure to incorporate the inflationary factors we've seen over the last couple of years. Debt service is largely flat for the first 2 years here, and then we'll talk later about why it's increasing in fiscal 26 and 27, or why there's a planned increase there for capital projects. And really the bulk of what you hear us talk about tonight is that third row down, the capital and water supply projects. That's the driving force behind a lot of the rate proposals you'll see. And you'll see that that's increasing dramatically over the years from $26 million currently, or $19 million currently. And as you can follow the rows out to $53 million. So over a doubling of our capital program in 4 years. Also this year, new to the rate financial plan is contributions to reserves. And so we need to build back reserves, as Ben mentioned, and as I'll go into greater detail. But what that captures is $2.5 million for our unrestricted operating reserve to build that back for future emergencies, as well as an additional $2.5 million dedicated to water supply projects. And so if you look to the bottom line, we're looking at increases in terms of expenditures planned over the next 4 years, starting at about 19% and then declining to a more inflationary based increase by the 4th year. And so what this shows is if you take our fiscal year 24 expenditure plan by category and break it down into a little more detail, I think it's clear looking at this that the biggest piece of the pie is our personnel. And Ben mentioned many of the core services that we do. Really at the heart of this organization, we are a service organization. It takes people to do the work that we do here, whether that's out on the watershed, whether it's emergency repairs, distribution operators working 24/7, and all the way to our customer service that's always there in implementing our special program. So that really is the bulk of our cost, 40%. It is not the bulk of our cost increases going forward, as we'll talk about. Again, those are more on the capital side, but just rounding out the slide here, services and supplies for ongoing operations is about 28% of our budget. Debt service there at the top, 7%. And then capital projects would normally be about 14%, but we're adding there with enhancements and water supply reliability projects in the proposed rate structure and financial plan. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're adding contributions to reserves as part of this year's or this rate cycle's financial planning process. And so one of the challenges we have here, and it's not unique to Marin necessarily, but as a utility and as a water agency, we really have a high degree of fixed expenses, and that's shown on the pie chart there on the left, with about 95% of our expenses fixed and only 5% variable. And I want to clarify here that this is fixed in relation to the amount of water that we sell, right? Our costs don't change very much with water distributed to our customers, in the sense that we have marginal costs for electricity for the pumping and marginal costs for chemicals. But really all of our costs are fixed costs when it comes to our overall operation. And I think we've said it before in a couple of the rate setting or rate process meetings here, that our service really here is providing water, or our business model is providing water as a service. However, our revenue model is based on our rates and based on consumption. So you see there on the right-hand side, over half of our revenues currently are variable. And so that obviously is a mismatch. And again, that's not necessarily a mismatch unique to Marin, but as the next slide will show here, I think that mismatch starts to really show itself when you have a big change on one side or the other. And then in this case, go ahead, next slide. In this case, the revenue side with consumption dropping dramatically in fiscal year 22, it really throws an imbalance into the overall equation there. So this chart shows the last 20 or so years of our water demand, meaning how much water we're billing for, how much water we're distributing. You can see here that, little by little, if you take the long-term averages, our consumption is actually down compared to 20 years ago. And we're not expecting, a huge bounce back in the next 4 years. So we are expecting somewhat of a return to the normal patterns here. But as the dotted lines there on the right indicate, we expect to be well below our long-term average, at least for this next 4-year planning period. And so that will, by definition, have an impact on our revenues, and I'll show you how it did impact in the past. But when you have 50% of your revenues on variable water sales, and you have a situation like this that we faced, it really forces you to make adjustments. And so go ahead and go to the next slide. One of the pieces there, I guess I'll go to the expense side here. We talked about revenues in the last slide. We talked about our fixed expenses with 95% being fixed. And what we see on this slide is that we're actually facing quite a bit of inflation over the last 2 years. So that balance of revenues and expenses, again, holds true under most years when you kind of are in that tight range. But you can see with the orange bars here in some of the key categories in the middle there, fuel, utilities, electricity, and construction costs, we really saw divergence from that normal 2 or 3 or 4% pattern to the tune of double digits. And we're continuing to see that as we get bids in for projects and as we get the next round of supplies. So we've been looking at 15, 19, and 14% in some of our largest ticket items. I would also point out to the board here, the public, that even those 2 years there, 2020 and 2021, we started seeing 6, 7, 8, and 10% in many of these categories. So they've been adding for years, and it'll take us a while to really kind of catch up to the new price points and many of these key inputs. And I think what I showed there before was more kind of broad indicators, Bay Area wide inflation. And what I show here on these slides, and go and click through these, Terry, is, it's specifically to the items that we purchase are much higher than even the average was there in those indices. So 10% in our purchased water from Sonoma, which Ben mentioned was 25% of our overall supply. We're seeing costs for welded steel pipe being 17 to 20% per year over the last 3 years. Water meters, as we replace them and put new meters in out there, up over 90% since 2021. Paving contracts on the right, we spent a lot of time talking about this as a board. They've risen over 100%, so doubled since 2020 for the jobs that we do for emergency repair, as well as just our planned capital projects. Insurance premiums, living here in California, being in an area where there's wildfire risk and where in general California is becoming a more litigious state. Our insurance premiums have risen over 50% since 2021. And then finally, as Director Sampson noted, water treatment chemicals, we saw a 42% increase in unit costs for the last bidding cycle. And this is on top of what was over a 20% increase we saw last year. So this number is updated for these slides, but we've seen 2 years in a row of 20%, now 40% on our water treatment chemicals. So what that does, it's no surprise, is it really turns into an operating loss in terms of our operating budget. Revenues are not keeping up with expenses. And so in the first year there, fiscal 23 on the left, you can see our operating shortfall is 10.6 million. And I would say that was offset. So it's artificially lower than the other years because we've had expenditure savings from vacancies where we've held positions and not filled them. And we also deferred some capital projects to weather the storm. So we spent less money in our capital projects over the last 2 years. It helped us to keep the deficit to a $10 million deficit. Projecting out with the new costs we have under the current rate structure, those deficits would increase dramatically over the next couple of years, $26 million next year, and then increasing each year as inflation continues to rise to about $38 million by the fourth year. So when revenues are not keeping pace with expenses, the impact, the only way the district has to pay our bills is to use reserves. And so as Ben indicated at the beginning here, we had very well-funded reserves in 2021 to be able to weather either an economic and or a climate or kind of a drought-based emergency. Those reserves were used, as you can see here, a little over $30 million was used over 2 years to bridge the gap, to keep operations running and to make sure we can get to this point where we can reset our rate structure to match the demand patterns and to match our expenses. And so if we kept that running out in fiscal 24, again, under the current rate structure, those reserves would be nearly depleted by the end of next year. We'd be down to our last $5 million without any other action. And so these are kind of a combination. They build upon each other of revenues not keeping up, expenses being more, and then reserves filling the gap. And so when we look at this, analytically, we've been working on this for a couple months now, or actually closer to a year. And so you look into why is this really happening? What are the root causes of why we're facing such a deficit? And so I mentioned 42% of our budget is for staffing costs. And so we looked into staffing first, and are those kind of the areas that are getting away from us? And so as you can see here, over the last 10 years, staffing levels in terms of number of full-time employees have remained relatively flat. And actually, it was a significant reduction from where we were at in 2012. You can see that drop from 263 down to 244. We've had our ups and downs by a couple positions each year, but we've really held the staffing levels flat over the last couple of years for a variety of reasons to contain costs. I would note that the last two over there, 24 and 25, reflect the rate proposal, which is an addition of 2 staffing members next year and an additional 2 staffing members in 2025. And the 2 staffing members we're recommending for next year would be a ranger trainee out on the watershed, as well as an organizational training specialist in our HR department to make sure that we are keeping up with all of our certifications and supporting our staff. Fiscal 25 would be bringing back a valve exercising crew in the operations division that was cut years ago as part of the cost containment. And we've determined that the valve exercising crew being cut is actually causing us more problems and more expenses over the long term, because we're having to spend more time actually getting out there and cleaning out the valves and working on them when it comes to emergencies and or standard replacement projects. So bringing back the valve exercising crew will actually help the district be more efficient going forward. So if it's not staffing levels, essentially it's bringing our budget out of balance. We looked at our overall operations budget, and again here this shows that over the last 10 years, we've had an average annual increase of about 4% per year in our operating budget. So again, that's right in line with inflation. It wasn't necessarily operating expenses that were driving it going into this last cycle. It was really more of a revenue issue. And again, as I pointed out in the first slide of the financial plan, 24 and 25 are in excess of that 4% trend line as we catch up to the inflationary factors we've seen in the last couple of years. But we are expecting that to come back down into that 4, 5, 6% range towards the end of the rate planning cycle. And so we looked farther back into our rate increase history as we prepared for this. And I would say that, as we've been here for over 100 years as a district, none of the problems that we face today are necessarily new. And many of them are, have been addressed by many boards in the past. And I think each year we have to recalibrate and figure out how to best balance ourselves going forward. But just taking a look at the actual history here at the district and how we've gone about rate setting process. MMWD bills have increased by an average of about 4% per year over the last 30 years. So that's probably what you would expect from the outside looking in. Inflation's been about 3% during this time, so those are largely correlated together. When we look at other agencies, specifically nationally, the AWWA is the American Water Works Association. They did a survey covering the 20-year period from 1998 to 2018. And that showed that most agencies, or the average rate increase for all agencies, was 10% per year. And that's actually about twice the rate of inflation. So that tells you that in order to maintain just what everyone else is doing across the country, you probably need to be expecting to have rate increases or bill increases of about double the inflationary period as a baseline. And that obviously is a long-term average over the whole country. But for Marin here being right at inflation, we were actually losing ground compared to the rest of the industry, and our purchasing power, or the ability of our rates to pay for operations, was going down over time. What we look at why other agencies exceed inflation over time is largely that second bullet: aging infrastructure, regulations, as we have to adapt to new regulations, and then climate change. Those are all things that are in excess of just normal inflationary expenses that water districts have to grapple with. The last bullet there, I think shows that due to uncertainty and in weather and kind of demand patterns here at the district, we've had large swings in our rate increases. So again, from a financial planning perspective, you'd like to kind of be slow and steady, predictable rate increases each year and not large swings. But looking back, that's not been our history. We had 16 years during that period with 0%, meaning flat or no rate increases. We had 3 years with double-digit or greater increases. So that's not how you draw it up. If you planned it going forward, you'd rather have, like I said, a slow and steady, at least inflationary each year, and probably closer to that 10% number you see up there at the top to maintain pace with inflation. I think one thing that goes into that too is that, as I showed with the demand, when you have efficiency efforts taking hold and conservation efforts, you're actually having a smaller base with which to spread your costs. So that means the revenue required to support your operations is allocated over a smaller base. So mathematically, also you'd expect rates, over time to increase, disproportionately to inflation. And so I know there was a lot to kind of go through in words there. I think the next slide captures a lot of it more graphically, and you can kind of see that. How many of those years were flat, the 14 times during that 22-year period where we had a 0% rate increase here at the district. We had a couple there in the middle, between 2007 and 2012, that were right along lines with inflation. And then we had to adjust. We've had to adjust a lot in the last 10 years. So 2016 and 2019, those were increases to the median customer here, the median use bill. And those were largely fixed fees. And that was for the capital maintenance fee and for a watershed management fee. And so you add all that together and it brings you back to where I had my last slide, where we've been about averaging 3 to 4% over this long-term period. It's just unfortunately come with lots of flat years and then a couple of spike years. And so we're trying to, as been mentioned with some of our goals in the rate structure, trying to set the district on a path to have much more predictable and slow and steady rate increases in the future. So with the rate setting process here, as I transition to the next section, knowing that's all kind of background and kind of more of the inputs that go into this. The overall rate setting process began in 2022, and staff here worked with the independent water rate consultant to perform what's called a cost of service analysis. And I'll talk about that more in depth here in the next few slides. But essentially what a cost of service analysis does is it kind of takes a step-by-step approach, beginning with a financial plan. So when you have a financial plan, it's going to let you know where your expenses are, and that kind of helps define the revenue requirement, because the revenue has to cover the expenses. So under the expenditures there, we're talking about our baseline budget, which is basically just the normal operations we do each and every day. You add in your inflationary cost drivers that I spoke about previously, and then non-discretionary expenditures. Those could be regulatory. Those could just be imposed on us from the outside, from local jurisdictions in terms of paving requirements, or things we just need to do to keep pace, whether that's technology investments or other ways of maintaining our efficiency. So that's the baseline budget, just the normal operations. And then we spend quite a few meetings here discussing district-wide funding enhancements. And that gets into the opportunities here at the district of how can we move the district forward without just kind of doing the normal day-to-day type activities. So we have some slides there coming here in the presentation that talks about our district-wide funding enhancements and how those played into the overall revenue requirement. The second piece of the rate study is the rate design. And that really is, how do we allocate proportionally across our customer base, the revenues that are required to fund district operations. And so when we looked at that rate design process, again, Ben mentioned these at the beginning, but we wanted to take a look at how we can reduce fixed fees. And then by definition, how we would use volumetric or variable rates to fund any enhancements. And then with that, how, to design our tier breaks to better match our customer demand patterns. And then incorporating drought rates so that we're not caught in the future without the ability to increase rates during times of severe droughts. And so those are the four key pieces of our rate design that we studied. And again, I'll talk about those in more depth here in the next couple of slides. And so the rate setting process overall is outlined by Proposition 218. And so it doesn't just apply here in Marin, it's all throughout California. We all are beholden to the same requirements in terms of how we go about setting the rates here for a water utility. And the basic provisions are shown there. Rates cannot exceed the cost of providing service. And so Ben mentioned this in his first slide, but I think it's important to mention that all the revenues we raise here in the district go reinvest back into the district, reinvest into the future of the district, reinvest into the capital and or the efficiency and operations. And so they can't exceed the cost of providing service. We don't make a profit here. It all goes towards our service delivery. And then secondly, as I started to talk about in the rate design, our cost recovery methodology must be proportional to the overall customer base. And so there's two pieces here that we really focused on in the district. On the left there, you see the cost of service analysis. That was the piece that we talked about with the recent trends, our rate structure, and the kind of inputs to our revenue requirement. And then the other piece of that is our public outreach and our engagement. So Prop 218 has requirements when it comes to how we set rates, and those are noted on the bottom with asterisks on the bottom right. We have to mail notices to our customer base and hold a public hearing, which is why we're here today. But here at the district, we've had a long and I think well-developed reputation for going above and beyond our public outreach and engagement requirements. And so we've had many board meetings talking about these issues. We conducted multiple customer workshops. We've updated our website along the way. And we've sent many bill inserts and e-news outlets, making sure our customers are informed of the process. We've also worked with news releases and our media partners, as well as distributing information on social media. So trying to meet all of our customers where they get their news and trying to make sure they're all aware of the process. Part of our overall structure here at the district, again, this is not new this year, but when we do talk about our overall rate setting process, we want to make sure that our customers are aware of the discount programs that are available, because the district does offer very generous and robust discount programs, in fact, more so than any of our regional partners here in the Bay Area. And so just to make sure that the board here and the public is aware of the financial assistance we do offer, we have a medical disability discount for those that qualify, where we waive certain fees and we discount additional water if it's medically required. We also have a waiver program based on income that subtracts water charges from and some fees from qualifying customers' bills. And I would mention here in this case that we offer this discount based on waiver we have a higher threshold, meaning more people can qualify for this program. And we also waive more fees than any other agency does in the area in terms of the benefit that comes from this discount. And that currently benefits over 1,000 of our customers. And then in the last rate cycle, we implemented what's called our Super Saver program. And that provides an automatic discount for the lowest 5% of water users. And so each bill cycle, about 3,000 customers benefit from that, the ones that are using the least amount of water. Okay, so we talked about the cost of service analysis, and I briefly went through it, but here I'll have a few slides here that go more in depth. And so this is more of a graphic that kind of talks about each step along the way. It starts with the policy and rate structure review. We'll go into demand projections. And then what I'm going to talk about here more in depth is a revenue requirement, as that's a really key input. And as shown on the bottom there with that graphic, the key inputs for the revenue requirement are a baseline budget, as mentioned, water supply projects here at the district, capital investment levels, and then service enhancements. And so those are the four key inputs. One of the main assumptions we have for a cost of service analysis. I should say these are the main assumptions that went into our cost of service analysis. Number one, our demand will remain well below averages. And I showed that chart there earlier where we had a 22% drop in fiscal 21, and we'll expect some return, but we're not going to expect to return to our long-term averages in this rate cycle. Inflation, we think, will continue to impact our core operations. We are including funding for the water supply roadmap, as we'll talk about during the capital section. We'll talk about in more depth again later about our capital infrastructure, but we have quite a bit of deferred maintenance here at the district. And so the rate proposal before you has a phased in approach to addressing those capital infrastructure needs over the 4 years. That may include debt service in the out years for some critical projects, as Alicia will talk about. We talked about reserves. Those have been used, and they were used, as intended. And then we'll need to replenish those in this rate cycle to be ready for the next emergencies or next uncertainties. And then finally, with all of this, I think we want to acknowledge that, there are many uncertainties when you look forward, especially 4 years. Nobody has a crystal ball. And so a lot of these assumptions above were informed by the data and the trends and what we have here at the district. But I think we all know that the pace of climate change and the frequency intensity of droughts is unknown. And I think none of us know, how long and or to what level inflation will continue to be a factor in our financial planning. So revenue requirement is the next section here. And so I'll talk for the first couple slides on the operating side, and then I'll turn it over to our capital team to finish out the capital investments and water supply projects. When we talk about our revenue requirement, and again, this was mentioned earlier, but our baseline operating deficit was largely based on reduced demand. And so, I think no business can really withstand a 20% drop in your main revenues without having some sort of adjustment. And so, this rate study and the proposal before you, addressed the reduced demand and the expectations of a reduced demand over the longer term, and also incorporated inflationary cost drivers in many of our core operations areas. We talked about deferred maintenance and how we maintain pace with the replacement and improvement needs of a 100-year-old district here. And I think one of the things we came across in our analysis and investigation of our deferred maintenance is that our current capital program, which is about $20 million, actually needs about more than double that just to keep pace with our current infrastructure, not counting future enhancements and or water supply projects. Just our basic infrastructure in the ground, we'd have to spend about double what we're currently spending just to maintain pace with that. And so again, we're taking a phased in approach to that to get there, but deferred maintenance was a big driver here with the revenue requirement, as Alicia will talk about. Water supply roadmap, again, Alicia will go over, but that includes 3 main components. First of all, short-term, no regrets projects that are within our own footprint here at the district. The second piece would be continued work on longer-term, more substantial projects that require additional professional studies. And then finally, as I mentioned at the very beginning, establishing a water project reserve, a water supply project reserve that would be used to offset the costs for future large-scale water projects. Service enhancements are a smaller portion of the rate increase and of the budget going forward, but they are important and they do really help the organization move forward in a couple key areas out there at the watershed, not only with the ranger trainee that I mentioned, but also enhanced funding for the BIFIP, which is our fire and fuels improvement program out there. And then, as I mentioned, in future years, we have a valve exercising crew that's added to help maintain efficiency in operations. I've covered reserves a couple of times, but technology is also another big piece of what we're planning for over the next 4 years. And again, Alicia will cover that with two key systems being our SAP enterprise-wide financial planning system, as well as AMI. And so two pieces of the operating budget that I wanted to talk about before I turn it over to Alicia here, as they come up in many meetings, and they are two of the cost drivers here. Our watershed, which is our primary local supply here at the district. We have protection of that watershed is a key priority here. And so those four bullet points there at the top, those are what we talk about when we talk about our watershed operations: watershed protection and maintenance, our vegetation and natural resources, our fisheries program, and then our grants and legislation. As I mentioned in the prior slide, the BIFIP, the Biodiversity Fire and Fuels Integrated Plan, currently has a budget of $2.3 million when you don't count the grants we receive there. And we are recommending a 27% increase or $500,000 beginning next year to really improve our investments and really make more progress each year in terms of brush clearing and fire improvements. Capital infrastructure, again, Alicia will talk a little bit more about this on the capital side, but we are increasing our funding for deferred maintenance on the watershed beginning in fiscal year 25. And if you really look out into the future plans, 26 and 27, you'll see we'll have about double the annual investment out there in the watershed than we currently do. And then just as a note, we work hard on obtaining grants to support a lot of the watershed activities. And so grant funds currently support not only our BIFIP program, but have also provided key funding for the Azalea Hill Restoration and Lagunitas Creek Fisheries Program. And then the last slide I have here before I turn it to Alicia is just a slide on conservation, because again, that's another operating cost for the most part that you'll see here at the district. And it's a big focus for future planning and for future efforts. And so there are three kind of primary areas that go into our conservation program, one being community engagement, another being incentives, and the third one being regulations. And so when we talk about enhancing funding for that going forward, we do have proposed enhanced funding for a water conservation element, and that would be to implement, to improve our marketing and to implement more outreach to increase participation levels in our rebate programs. We have improved analytics so that we know, which programs are working and where the bang for our buck is and how we can best impact long-term behavior. Targeted advertising programs, same thing. We can spend our money wisely and make sure we're really reaching the customers that we need to. And then gray water training for a lot of our professionals to make sure that those resources are in the community so that people who want to take advantage of them can. And so we really want to make sure we're supporting, each and every piece of that, those programs under the water conservation element, as well as those top areas, their community engagement, incentives, and regulations. I would also mention that grants play a key piece in this. And we did recently receive a grant that will help us in the next 3 years in terms of enhancing our overall conservation programs. And then AMI, which is automated metering infrastructure, that will play a big part in the long term here for the district in terms of conservation efforts. And so the costs to enhance or to expand and enhance our AMI program are also included in the proposed rates before you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alicia to talk about the capital piece of our revenue requirements and give an overview of our overall capital program.
Thanks, Brett. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, board. My name is Alicia Irish. I'm the engineering manager of planning here at the district, and I'll be walking you through our capital improvement program. This table here shows our 4-year, $200 million capital improvement program plan. This plan is broken out into 8 different categories, which I'll be going into more detail during my presentation tonight. This 4-year plan starts out with baseline funding at the rate of $19.4 million, and it increases just under $1 million per year to fiscal year 27 at the rate of $22.4 million. We have about $4 million of grant funded projects, each in fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. That number does go down in fiscal year 26 and 27, and that's largely due to the fact that we have many pending applications that are currently under review. And so during the next 2 years, we will find out about those, and our grant funding projects should go up in the next 2 years for the years 3 and 4. We do have $4.5 million of fire flow funding for each year. This is part of our fire flow improvement program, which is a 19-year program that we're currently in the middle of. Now we get into some of our additional revenue requirements. We have revenue requirements for water supply beginning at $2.75 million in fiscal year 24. That increases to $9.2 million in fiscal year 25, $9.7 million in fiscal year 26, and then goes back down to $3 million in fiscal year 27. And those two increases are largely due to the implementation of 2 of our early action no regrets projects that are the result of the roadmap implementation from the strategic water supply assessment. We also have revenue requirements for the backlog stabilization that Brett referred to address some of our deferred maintenance on our aging infrastructure. This does ramp up over the 4-year period, and it begins at just over $3 million in fiscal year 24, and by fiscal year 27 is at $14.6 million. Beginning in fiscal year 26, we do have $5.2 million allocated to address some of our larger capital projects. This revenue would be in the form of debt service that we're factoring into the later years to address 1 to 2 of the select larger capital projects that I'll also be discussing later on. There's enhanced funding for the Watershed Biodiversity, Fire and Fuels Implementation Program at the rate of $500,000 per year in fiscal year 24. And that ramps up over time to $579,000 by fiscal year 27. And finally, we have revenue requirements for system improvements, beginning at $525,000 in fiscal year 24 and ending at almost $9.5 million in fiscal year 27. This is largely covering 2 system improvement projects, such as the SAP conversion for our enterprise resource planning, as well as the AMI full-scale implementation. So you can see the bottom row, our total capital improvement program starts out at $35 million in fiscal year 24 and nearly doubles by fiscal year 27 to about $60 million. To give some examples of some of the projects that we'll be covering with our baseline funding and grant funding, this photo on the left is our Coal Drive Pipeline Replacement Program. This project takes place in Marin City, and this project will replace all of the cast iron pipe within Marin City, close to 3 miles of pipe there. And this is largely funded through a $7 million IRWIM grant that we are in the final stages of receiving. And this project will take place over the next 3 years, fiscal years 24 through fiscal years 26. The photo in the center highlights the Corte Madera cast iron pipeline replacement project. This project takes place in East Corte Madera, and it replaces 65-year-old cast iron pipe about 7,200 feet on Paloma, Granada, and El Camino streets. And the pipes in this area have currently been undergoing numerous leaks during the early part of this year, and we've been able to accelerate this project to the top of the queue. We also have the Green Bay Boardwalk Pipeline Replacement Project. This project will replace, again, the cast iron pipe on this leading to the residence here, as well as the wooden supports that take the pipe to the end of the line. Across our watershed, we have some more examples of projects that will be funded through our baseline funding. In the center here is the Spillway Repair Project. This is the second phase of our condition assessment program. And the spillway repairs will be taking place on Seeger Dam at Nicasio Lake, Peters Dam at Kent Lake, as well as Suluhuli Reservoir. The watershed will also be continuing its culvert replacement program, performing trail restoration, as well as continuing on their fire and fuels management program. And you can see the 2 photos on the right highlighting the before and after photos that this project implements. And these are just 2 asset classes that we've highlighted, but we do also have baseline projects taking place for our pump stations, our storage tanks, our treatment plants, and other system improvements. Now getting into some of the additional funding enhancements, first starting with our water supply. This table here shows our preliminary funding schedule for capital investments as it pertains to water supply. And the top two rows here are those early action, no regrets projects that I mentioned earlier. The first project is the Phoenix to Bontempi connection project. This has a total estimated project cost of about $5.2 million. The next project is the Suluhuli electrification project for a total estimated project cost of about $7.2 million. These two projects we plan to have fully implemented within this 4-year process. The third row is funding that's dedicated towards our roadmap implementation or some of the preliminary steps for the long-term projects that are identified as the result of the strategic water supply assessment. There's just over $12 million of funding dedicated to these long-term projects over the next 4 years. And we also have $2.5 million of water supply project reserve that we plan to fund over the next 4 years as well, for a total of about $35 million dedicated towards water supply projects. To give some more detail to these early action projects, first is the Phoenix Bontempi connection project. This project will install new infrastructure to pump water up from Phoenix Lake to Bontempi Reservoir. And this project will improve the operational efficiency and allow for more frequent use of this lake without the intensive system modifications that are required today. The next project, the Suluhuli electrification project, will improve the operability and flexibility of this water storage facility. This project will bring consistent power to Suluhuli Reservoir, allowing us to utilize this reservoir more frequently and would set us up for improved efficiency for a long-term operating model. Now to get into some of the funding that will be dedicated towards the capital backlog stabilization. The next 3 slides will be presenting NESI curves or financial planning towards the 3 asset classes of storage tanks, pipelines, and pump stations. And what these charts show are various scenarios of rehab rates for each of these asset classes and how the backlog is affected over time. This first chart here shows our storage tank asset class. And you can see with this enhanced funding that we're not only able to stabilize the backlog of this asset class, but we're able to slightly decrease our backlog over time. This is due to the fact that we will be able to complete 2 to 3 tank rehabilitation projects per year, which sets us on an improved trajectory as opposed to not having this enhanced funding. The next chart shows our pipeline asset class. And you can see that even though with this enhanced funding, we will still be slightly increasing our backlog of deferred maintenance on our pipeline asset class, we're still moving in a positive direction than if we were not to have this enhanced funding. Similarly, for our pump station asset class, the enhanced funding does put us on a positive trajectory as we are able to complete 1 to 2 pump station rehabilitation projects per year. This table here shows the breakdown of this funding schedule across our 6 asset class categories. And you can see in fiscal year 24, there will be just over $3 million of funding dedicated to these 6 asset class categories. That more than doubles in fiscal year 25 to $6.6 million. Goes up to about $10.5 million in fiscal year 26, and finally $14.6 million in fiscal year 27, for a total of close to $35 million of funding dedicated towards our deferred maintenance of our aging infrastructure for our system, placing us on a much improved trajectory than if we were not to have this funding. Now to get into some of the enhanced funding dedicated to a watershed biodiversity, fire and fuels management program. This funding is in addition to our baseline and grant funding. And it starts off at the rate of $500,000 in fiscal year 24 and goes all the way up to $579,000 in fiscal year 27. And this enhanced funding allows us to address an annual additional 235 acres, or a 17% increase in the acreages that we're able to address with this program. These acreages and this funding will be spread across the many activities that are included in our BIFIT plan, such as French broom removal and routine fuel break maintenance. Now to get into some of the system improvements. The two major projects that will be addressed with this enhanced system funding will be our SAP conversion. SAP is the enterprise resource planning software that we currently use today. And this software is used to manage our day-to-day activities, such as accounting, budgeting, procurement, inventory, maintenance management, billing, and customer service. And this piece of software has been at use in the district for over 20 years, and it's at the end of its life. This means that there are no more updates planned for this piece of software beyond the year 2027. This total project cost is about $7 to $8 million. And next we have the full implementation of AMI, or advanced metering infrastructure. Funding for this begins in fiscal year 27 in the amount of $2.5 million. And as we've learned at previous meetings, AMI is an educational tool that's used to provide customers further opportunities to use water wisely. AMI gives customer access of real-time water use data through the engagement of the customer portal, as well as real-time leak notifications. The full project cost for this is over $20 million. Now to get into some of our larger capital projects. We have 4 potential larger capital projects that we will be bringing to the board at a later date for prioritization. And there is debt service that is factored in to the CIP beginning in fiscal year 26 to implement 1 to 2 of these projects. These projects are the North Marin Line Pipeline Replacement Project, the Smith Saddle Tanks Replacement, Ross Reservoir Tank Replacement, and the San Geronimo Clarifiers. The photo on the top right shows a picture of our existing San Geronimo treatment plant clarifiers. And this project would replace both of these clarifiers that are currently lacking lateral resistance and are prone to seismic vulnerability. The photo on the bottom right is a picture of our Ross Reservoir, which is a 100-year-old 1 million gallon tank serving the Ross Valley area. This tank serves almost a quarter of our customers, and it is in need both for replacement as well as enlargement. Another project that is being considered for these large capital projects is the Smith Saddle tanks. The Smith Saddle tanks are some of our largest potable transmission tanks, and collectively they store 10 million gallons of water. They were last recoded in 1983, and they are in need of replacement. The total project cost for this is estimated at $24 million. And finally, we have the North Marin Line Pipeline Replacement Project. The North Marin Line is our sole transmission line from Sulahuli, Nicasio, and Kent Lakes to the San Geronimo treatment plant. And if this line were to fail, there would be no water feeding the San Geronimo treatment plant. The highlighted section of this pipe on the photo on the left is a 4-mile section of 33-inch concrete cylinder pipe installed in 1957. And this line also crosses Lagunitas Creek in 2 separate locations and is in need of replacement. The total estimated project cost for this is about $28 million. In summary, we have backlog funding distributed across our asset classes to begin to address this deferred maintenance of our aging infrastructure. And in addition to our baseline capital funding and our funding dedicated towards deferred maintenance, we also have proposed funding for our early action water supply projects, enhanced fire and fuels management work, and SAP replacement. And we also have debt service factored in to our future capital budget beginning in fiscal year 26 for select 1 to 2 of these larger capital projects. I'll now be passing this back off to Brett to discuss our financial plan.
Thank you, Alicia. And so Alicia went through the capital portion of the revenue requirement. And so what this slide does is it starts to put that all together in terms of total dollars over the next 4-year planning period. And you can see they're sizable. The water supply resiliency enhancements there at the top. You add them all together, and we're talking about over $40 million in new expenditures to improve and enhance our water supply. So a significant move forward there. The capital and IT systems there in the middle box, that's about $50 million of increased spending to make sure we're keeping up with our aging infrastructure and providing the technology to keep running efficiently. And then, as I mentioned earlier, service enhancements are a key piece of this, though a much smaller dollar amount, a little over 5 million or a little less than $5 million there at the bottom, but they're taken from a list of many needs across the district and prioritized for just the ones that really hit the key areas prioritized by the board. So the next phase in the overall cost of service analysis in terms of the rate building approach is the rate design. So once we went through the revenue requirement and your board prioritized what to include in the overall revenue portion of the cost of service analysis, the next step is the rate design. And so as indicated by the check marks there in the bottom, that covers tier breaks, the balance of fixed versus variable costs, drought rates, and we also looked into how we can consolidate customer classes to simplify the overall rate structure. So the first piece of that here is tier breaks, so residential tier breaks. Based on the demand patterns we analyzed, it made more sense from a cost justification perspective to adjust those residential tiers down to where the actual use is occurring. Along with that, we looked at the tier seasonality, which is something that's unique to Marin here in the sense of our current rate structure allows additional lower cost tier use in summer months, even though to the district, it doesn't cost us any less in the summer months to provide water. So we really wanted to smooth that out and make sure it's just the same tier year round to better reflect our costs. Drought rates there, we did a lot of work here at the district on the water shortage contingency plan in terms of defining those levels and how we're going to go through if we do face another drought. And drought rates is just the schedule of surcharges that would be in the rate structure to recover any lost revenue we have during times of decreased demand that's related to drought. Fixed fees, as we mentioned that a few times, I think that the last few years, the district has increased our fixed fees to the point where our fixed fees were higher than many of our comparable agencies here in the Bay Area. So one of the eyes we had on this was to reduce our fixed fees to get more back in that overall balance. And so the three key pieces here is that we converted our watershed management fee to a volumetric charge. So it's proportional to use across all users and on the volumetric side and no longer a fixed fee. Secondly, our service charge and our capital maintenance fee. Those are other two pieces of our fixed charge. We've limited those to inflation-based increases in years 2, 3, and 4 in the overall rate structure. And in year 1, what we're doing there on the third bullet under fixed fees is adjusting the single family and duplex meter equivalent methodology for how we calculate the fixed charges. And it's a pretty kind of in-depth, wonky sentence there. But the idea is that I think in our past rate structure, we used kind of national standards set by the AWWA. And this time we wanted to improve on that and wanted to factor in actual usage data across the customer class. And that resulted in lower fixed charges for our single family and our duplex customers. Finally, on the bottom there, we wanted to consolidate our customer classes to reflect similar usage patterns where they exist. And so we have, I think, over 10 customer classes right now on our books. And so we combine our single family and residential duplex classes because those are largely similar in terms of overall demand on the system and in terms of the cost to the district. And then secondly, we combined our single family irrigation class, which is all by itself kind of in its own category. We mix that in with the commercial, institutional, and irrigation classes, again, based on how we analyze the usage patterns over the past 4 years and based on the cost that it required for the district to provide water to those customers. So that helps our overall rate structure be more simple and easy to understand. And I think it really moves things forward in terms of fixed fees and going back up the chain there to a residential tier breaks, reflecting our current use much better. And so the next couple of slides go into the actual details of the rate structure. And I would just remind the board here and any public who's listening that we have the entire cost of service study posted online. We have it attached to the board packet here today. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm trying to summarize it here to the key points that I mentioned there to draw them out, but there's over many tables and many rates in there to go through. Happy to answer questions on them, but these are really the highlights. So first piece is those residential tiers, as I talked about. You can see there we had a summer and a winter tier, different amounts depending on the time of the year in each of the tiers. So we consolidated that. So it's just one tier, no more seasonal factors on the far right-hand side of your screen. We also reduced tier 1, the breakpoint, from either 21 or 26, depending on the time of the year, to 15. We reduced tier 2 to be 16 to 25 CCFs at any point in the year. Tier 3 then becomes 26 to 80, and tier 4 becomes anything above 81. And so that really, again, reflects our usage patterns that we saw and reflects the costs required to provide those services. The other side of that is the rate. So how much you charge within each tier. And again, not a lot of numbers on here. You can see our single family and duplex there on the left, and our multifamily, commercial, institutional, irrigation, and single family rates there on the right. We put those together in those two groups because those are the ones being consolidated. So we're aligning those rates there to reflect similar usage patterns within each category. You can see that the rates have been reset and adjusted to provide for the enhanced funding. They also increase in each of the next 4 years as the rate proposal makes its way through and provides the revenue needed that Alicia and I talked about for the expense side. In terms of fixed fees here, this shows our conversion of the watershed management fee to a volumetric charge. And so you could see on the left there, the existing proposal, you would pay each month or each bi-monthly, I should say, depending on your meter size in terms of supporting our watershed management program. Now we've adjusted that to be a single charge, uniform in nature across all usage, starting at 61 cents per CCF. And so it becomes much more proportional to the use and still provides the funding needed for the watershed management program. And then here's the fixed fee recommendations, and these get a little harder to see on a slide as we do have quite a few different categories, but they're basically based on meter size. And so I mentioned earlier that it's the standard amongst water agencies to use the AWWA kind of metrics for meter size and how much each meter size pays in relation to the meter before it. We have a little bit more complex system, and I won't go into detail here at the moment. But the idea there is we split apart single family residential and duplex into the top categories there. You can see they have their own rate structure up to 2 inches meter size. And then going down there on the other customer classes have a different rate structure. And again, that's based on using district data where we can to have a more proportional allocation of our fixed charges amongst the customer bases. And so that applies both to our service charge as well as our capital maintenance fee. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're establishing drought rates in the proposed rates you have before you, and these would be used only they would be linked to the water shortage contingency plan. They would be used only during severe droughts, and they're temporary in nature. So the maximum rates are what's noticed in the mailer, and what's noticed there. You can see depending on each stage of the drought, they're going towards the bottom. It goes from voluntary to mandatory, and each of those percentages you see were calculated by our rate consultant to recover the costs back to the district that we would see in lost revenue and offset by any costs that we would save essentially on producing less water. So you recover your revenues and you offset that by acknowledging there won't be as many costs if we're reducing our production by that amount. Again, these are the maximum rates we would apply. We would be coming back to your board to be able to implement these at the time, and we'd be able to refine them based on actual information on that we have in the system on actual consumption pattern changes. But we are required by Prop 218 to notice the maximum level within each that we can have on the books. And so this is the same slide that Ben showed at the beginning. It shows when you convert the rate structure like we did from less fixed fees and more volumetric, there are different impacts on customers depending on your meter size and depending on your volume. What we show here is the typical customer. We have the large majority of our customers, over 70% are residential. Within that, over 70% are 5/8 meter size. So this shows that typical residential single family customer. This shows the 5/8 inch meter. You can see the average increase or the impact on a typical customer is 23%. Again, as Ben mentioned, that's less of an impact on the lower water user, both percentage-wise and dollar-wise. And then by definition, it's more of an impact on a higher water user, so more proportional to the amount of water being used. You can see here on this slide and better on the next slide that the fixed fees, which is the blue portion on the bottom, goes down for each customer or each user kind of profile there. And so existing fixed fees are going to go down. So the proposed structure will have a lower fixed fee. And then as I mentioned a few times, the volumetric rate would make up for that in terms of the revenue produced to the district. This is the slide that kind of shows more of that fixed fee reduction I mentioned, and this is that kind of year one look. So it's the existing rates, 138 currently, going to 171 next year. You can see the fixed fee, not only does it not include the green band of watershed management anymore, but actually the other two are going down in total as well. So going from 62 to 47%, with the larger portion of the revenue coming to the district on the volumetric side for each customer. And then finally, as Ben mentioned, this is more than just a one-year rate increase. We are proposing to phase in a lot of the rate impacts over the next 4 years, and a lot of that has to do with the capital spending plans that Alicia covered. And so in each year, we're proposing that rates increase. It is increasing by less and less each year, meaning a smaller percentage as we get closer and closer to an inflationary-based pattern by year 4. But I've added the dotted line here to show the percentage of a typical customer of the fixed fee they would pay. So currently, as we showed, above 60%, dropping to below 50% in year 1, and dropping further and further each year till we're right about that 42% by the 4th year to a typical customer. So all in all, we think this is a rate package that best reflects the board's priorities, best funds the needed investments here in the district over the next 4 years, and is responsive in the sense of shifting the rate structure into a lower fixed fee profile and be more proportional to the overall customer class. So this is my last slide, just to recap all the things we talked about here this evening. The district's expenditure plan incorporates our highest priority investments. That includes water supply, capital projects, deferred maintenance. It also reflects inflationary cost drivers, operating enhancements, and then reserve replenishment as we prepare for the next uncertainty in terms of weather cycles and/or economic cycles. The revenues that are required to support those operating and capital expenses are reflected in the proposed rate increase. And those, as I mentioned a few times, are reduced fixed fees and lower residential tier breaks. And then the impacts to customers will vary depending on their water use and meter size. So with that concludes my presentation.
President Schmidt, I didn't know if you wanted to consider adjusting the time, if you had additional information and if you are wanting to say that now, and then I have a few words to share with the group.
You bet. So the current tally I think we have is 142 people online, something like that, 145. Okay. And then how many folks do we have in attendance? Do you have a sense?
142 on Zoom, and we have, I believe, 30 in person, and we have 12 comment cards submitted for in-person attendees at the moment.
I'm going to look to my fellow board members and suggest that at a roughly about 180 folks, if everybody were to speak for even just 1 minute, we would be here for 3 hours, which I think I get concerned about people who are trying to provide comments as the evening goes later. So any thoughts about moving to 1 minute? Okay. I think if, in fairness to everybody who wants to provide comments tonight, to not have it get too late where it's really unkind to have folks wait that long, I'm going to suggest we go to 1 minute. And with that, Molly, would you like to provide some comments about
Yes, thank you, President Schmidt. Thank you, President Schmidt. Yes, I'd like to share a little bit about why we're here tonight. This is our public hearing in compliance with Proposition 218, which is codified in the California Constitution, Article 13D, Section 6. The hearings held following our mailing of the Prop 218 notice, which included rate proposals, as well as notice of this public hearing this evening. As was shared earlier, we also did a lot of community outreach, many public meetings. We have a website posted with our cost of service analysis, as well as our Prop 218 mailer. And we also did publish in the Marin Independent Journal notice of this hearing. We published on May 9th that we were holding this tonight. So this hearing is being held more than 45 days following the mailing of our Prop 218 notice, as is required. And we're here for a couple of reasons tonight. One is to allow our customers to provide comments and concerns on the proposed rates that we're looking at. And we also want to allow for protests to be submitted. We have been collecting protests. They do need to be submitted in writing. We are collecting them over there. So if anyone is here, you don't have to speak in order to submit a written protest. If you want to make public comment, that will be heard, but it will not be counted as a protest. So if you are interested in filing a protest to be counted, you'll need to do that in writing. It will need your name, your parcel number, or a customer address, as well as your signature. So that there's being accepted only through the public hearing, and that means through the public comment period. So as soon as everybody's spoken tonight, our board president will close the public hearing, and we will not be accepting any more protests at that time. So now is the time for anyone here to submit those in writing. We will be announcing a count prior to proceeding this evening. We're here to determine whether or not to proceed with the rate proposal as presented. A majority protest would need to be had in order to stop the consideration by the board, and the majority protest is based on all of the parcel holders or property owners who are served by the district currently, and the record owners of the property. That's based on the current tax rolls, secured tax rolls that are maintained by the county tax assessor's office, and that's where we look to also to make sure that we're mailing out the notices appropriately. Whoever the record owner is, that those are the ones receiving the notices within the district. So I think, did I miss anything? I also want to introduce Luffy Karuf. He's an attorney with Best West & Krieger, who specializes in Prop 218 and rate hearings and water and wastewater rates as well. And our staff attorney, Jared Mills, who's been working with us, as you know, for several months on this. And of course, I'm here. And with that, I think we're prepared to take our public commentary.
Good evening. May I please have the following speakers? Jared Babala, Joe Arsenio, and then Mary Tassell, please. Yes, please go to the lectern. Yeah, that'd be fine. Yes.
All right. Should I start?
Yes.
Okay, 1 minute. So vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare. The Marin Water Plan represents the vision we need to ensure a long-term functioning and resilience of our water system, especially considering the impacts of climate change, with the action to make it happen. Therefore, I fully support the proposed fee increases. How many here remember the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, where citizens were subject to contaminated drinking water, resulting in exposure to dangerous levels of lead, and the third largest outbreak of Legionnaire's disease? Beyond the chemical and microbial exposures, citizens were left with little trust in their water and their supplier, and parents with the anxiety of putting their children in harm's way. We are all the beneficiaries of the forethought of prior generations who supported and paid for our infrastructure, and we should take the move forward. We owe it to ourselves and the future generations to ensure we have the safe and resilient water infrastructure that we need. Thank you.
Good. Next speaker, please, either Joe Arsenio or Mary Tassell. Go ahead, Ms. Tassell.
First, thank you. You've all put a lot of time and effort into this, and I respectfully request that you not do what you're proposing. And the reason I've written and my official protest, but basically what you're looking at is first an assumption, and you were talking about assumptions, that using water is wasting water. So I've included in my information to you documented scientific evidence that using water in the environment for gardens is not a waste. In fact, it's an environmental asset to such a degree that the first thing that would happen with what you're suggesting is that people would stop watering their gardens. And unfortunately, then it would all be on the watershed. And the problem that I see with that is it's the same as the assessment of this on us. We all are paying as ratepayers for what's going on here. And I can't afford that.
Thank you. Mr. Arsenio, please. And after him is Steve Chilos, Larry Minikes, and Todd Silverstein. Go ahead, Mr. Arsenio.
Yeah, you had three ways of resolving your economic problem. One of them was to raise rates over 58%, whatever it is, over these years. The second one would be to sell property. You are an extremely large property owner here in Marin. Property prices, some of you may have noticed, have gone up. You own 21,600 acres of Marin, a very valuable piece of property. My recommendation is sell some of it, resolve your problems. The third one, which you haven't contemplated, is selling the water company and keeping your land trust, which is essentially for environmental purposes. I'm opposed to the increase.
Steve Chilos, Larry Minikes, Todd Silverstein, please.
Hi, I'm Steve Childs. So your tier rate increases are between 58 and 129% over 4 years for the tiers. It feels a bit like current residents are being punished both for their collective effort to reduce demand and also for an inadequate planning in past years and decades by having residents shoulder the majority of the current financing shortfall. Other than rates and needs analysis, which you did at, obviously, I think residents deserve to know more to what extent alternatives to funding were proposed and analyzed. For instance, why wasn't a bond measure amortized over 30 years put on the last ballot instead of the proposed rate increases? And to the extent possible, could some of the cost of fire mitigation and management be offloaded to state agencies such as California Department of Forestry and others? Could grant research and writing capacity and Sacramento lobbying efforts be significantly increased to secure additional funding for state and federal level? Could MMWD invest more in shared capital expense projects funded by multiple water districts and cities where Marin gets a proportional benefit with lower investments, such as a desalination plant? And finally, aside from the extensive rates and needs analysis you've already done, it may be productive to hire an independent management consulting firm to identify out-of-the-box solutions instead of loading residents with this enormous financial burden. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of the Marin Conservation League, and if I may be afforded a few extra seconds to read into the minutes the letter that we sent the board, it would be greatly appreciated. The Marin Conservation League is devoted to the preservation of clean water and healthy biodiversity of the Marin watershed. To that end, MCL supports MMWD's proposed 4-year cost of service analysis-based water rate increases. The increased water rates will ensure the district's ability to meet the existing and future costs of operations, fund necessary ongoing infrastructure replacement investments, including water conservation measures to reduce demand. The increases are necessary to the district to maintain its commitment to the delivery of high-quality water while continuing to provide for the protection of biodiversity on its watershed lands. The proposed water rate increases will also allow the district to take the necessary steps to identify and pursue additional effective and feasible future water supply resiliency measures in order to meet extended drought conditions arising from the anticipated effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minikes. Mr. Todd Silverstein, then Roger Roberts.
So I wish to speak against the regressive nature of your proposed rate increases. And by regressive, I mean that they will hit hardest on those who use the least amount of water. Regarding water usage, you propose to decrease the maximum usage tier breaks in all 4 single-family residential tiers, but the decrease is 42% in tier 1 and only 19% in tiers 3 and 4. In cost per gallon, the 2023 increase is a whopping 62% in tier 1, but only 22% to 12% in tiers 2 to 4. Regarding the single-family residential service charge, you propose an increase of about 8% in 2023 for the 2 smallest meters, but a decrease of nearly 12% for the 1-inch meter. And I could say the same thing about the capital maintenance fee, which is going to hit the smallest users hardest, and also for the drought surcharge. So I have here an appendix that gives you a proportional increase that would have the same proportional increase for all 4 tiers.
Thank you. Mr. Robert Lasser, and then David Zeff. Mr. Roberts, please.
Good evening. I have a couple of comments and then a question. I support this water rate increase. It's been needed for a long time, and it's high time that it's been put into place. It has my full support. My other comment is that you currently, at your existing water rates, have absolutely no bonding capacity. In your projected income going forward, it's not clear to me what increased bonding capacity will be created in the exercise, given the fact that you also have significant obligations to replace infrastructure and deal with, building reserves. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Robert Lasser, and then David Zeff, please.
I'd like to talk about another issue, and that is pensions. Right now, I believe you guys are paying your retired employees $42,000 a year in perpetuity for all of them. And nowhere in this presentation was the pension debt and the unfunded pension debt as part of the calculations. What I gather is that a current payroll pension debt is 44% of the 42% that you guys pay in salaries. My line item analysis, well, amateur line item analysis of the salaries, it looks like to me that the pensions are going to incur 100% equal to salaries in 4 or 5 years from now. I see you're nodding your head. So that's my main concern, that we've got runaway pension debt that is not being calculated into your proposal.
Thank you. David?
I second what the last speaker just said about the pension and benefit issues, which should be addressed and made more in line with what's currently going on in the rest of the world, or at least the United States, and what Mimi Willard said in great detail. I love and respect this county and the water district and the lands that you guys have provided for us to use. But I do think that, and I'm not here to assassinate you, I think there are some areas you need to look at. You need to look at pensions and benefits and salaries. The other thing is you've been hit with 2 lawsuits over illegal rate increases, and you've had to pay legal fees to the people who sued you. The recent case was Coffey versus Municipal Water District, and the other one was Walker. And those make your insurance rates go up. So in a private setting, you would be subject to director's liability, and the lawyers who advise you would be subject to malpractice.
The next speakers, Grace Garrity, Bazia Crane, and Susan Bradford. Grace Garrity, please. Bazia Crane and Susan Bradford.
I'll be very quick because I know you don't want redundancies. I totally agree with everyone here who has protested this increase. And I strongly recommend that you consider the 5 solutions that Mimi Willard suggested. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next speaker then, Andrew Samuelson. And then Donna Beretta. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Beretta. Thank you.
With respect to the board, I protest the rate increases. I'm curious, I'm not a financial person, but there's something that doesn't make sense to me. You showed a slide that showed several years of no rate increases. Now, all of a sudden, we've got this 4-year plan with exorbitant rate increases. So Does that make sense? I've worked for a lot of corporate companies and usually they'll do like a 5 and 10-year plan so you can amortize the rates out. But this condensed 4-year plan is just way out of bounds. You've got on page 7 of your mailer, tier 1 water use increased 130%. And then your bi-monthly bill total increased 58%. That's incredible. I have never heard of any increases like this. So I protest. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Samuelson, please.
Hi, volumetric rate increases are unfair to home fruit and vegetable growers and make it financially impossible to grow your own fruit and vegetables. And that shipping all your fruits and vegetables to stores is not going to help climate change. That's going to create more greenhouse gases, and it's just there should be some sort of exemption for fruit and vegetable growers. They shouldn't be subject to the same volume, maybe a lower tier rate.
Thank you. Sachi Itagaki. Sorry, I'm not pronouncing it properly. And then Tom Boss, Sachi Itagaki and Tom Boss, please.
I think you missed me.
Are you? Okay. Please.
I'm Sachi Itagaki. I'm a ratepayer, but I'm also a licensed civil engineer, and I've got over 30 years of water resources planning experience. And I am in support of the rate. I understand, the aging infrastructure when you have, infrastructure that's gone back, perhaps over 100 years. I'm also in support of the climate variability initiatives, things like the wildfire resilience planning and things like that. I am really glad to see investments made in the watershed. I was just out there a couple of weeks ago and saw some of the roads are in terrible shape. Some of the trails need to be maintained. These are a public asset that we as ratepayers are being asked to maintain, and we all enjoy it. Others outside also enjoy it. And clearly we have a drought resilience issue here in the county. We need supply, we need storage. We've had droughts recently, those the ones that's most recent, but that climate variability is going to be coming again and again. So I'm in support of the investments.
Thank you. Susan Bradford, please.
Hi, I've been living here in Marin for 45 years. And I just want to mention, I noticed that at least 20 employees at MMWD are earning between 200,000 and 300,000, and 180 other employers are earning between 100,000 and 200,000. And I would just like to suggest that maybe you cinch your belts as well, since you're asking your customers to do that. Another way that you might consider reducing costs is stop purchasing fluoride chemicals that are corrosive to your pipes and your equipment, and they're toxic to humans and animals. And I also am curious how you're dealing with this draconian SB 35 that is going to affect our rates and our usage. And I encourage the MMWD to make a strong stand and put a ban on more water hookups in this county.
Thank you. So for those on Zoom. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Are you Basia Crane?
No, I'm Tom Boss.
Tom Boss. I
yeah.
apologize. Go ahead, Mr. Boss. And then after Mr. Boss is Paula Reynolds. Go ahead, Mr. Boss.
Right, no problem. Good evening, directors. First of all, a pleasure to be here in person for a change. It's been a long time, so good to see faces in person. I'm here, a 50-year customer of MMWD. I'm voicing support for the increases, and it's overdue. We really need to take care of this water supply and the 19,000 acre watershed. And I just want to point out my lowest monthly bill is my MMWD bill. It rarely gets over $100. It's usually under $100. Everything else is over 100, and energy is way over 100. And it's the best investment, in my opinion. It's essential that we have water, and the 19,000 acre watershed provides so much for the community, mental health, cognitive health, and whether you're on a bike or hiking or walking your dogs, that's better than any kind of health plan I can think of. So please go ahead and do what's needed to maintain it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boss. Next is Paula Reynolds, then Jim Beckham. Go ahead, Ms. Reynolds.
Thank you. My name is Paula Reynolds. I'm a 40-year resident of Mill Valley, and I just would like to say that I support the proposed rate increases. I believe they're a strategic, difficult, and important leadership decision that you've made to ensure that we have future water reserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Jim Beckham.
Yes, thank you. I strongly oppose the rate increases being proposed. And this is both the magnitude of the rate increases and also the process by which you are railroading these increases through. One public hearing is not sufficient given the number of people. And also, I think that the information that you send in the flyer is not sufficient for us to evaluate the legitimacy of your proposals, because you don't talk at all about alternatives that you considered to these initiatives and to these cost increases, nor do you talk about cost-saving measures that you are implementing or that you considered and rejected. So I ask you not to adopt the proposals until there has been more opportunity for public commentary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beckham. Next is Mr. Phil Sauter, then Clayton Smith and Ed Jameson. Go ahead, Mr. Sauter.
Thanks. I support the rate increase proposal. I'm glad that the district is taking into account the fact that heavy water users place more demands on the system and that it's more costly to supply them. Without large outdoor water use, we wouldn't need to be seeking new sources of supply, especially capital intensive and energy intensive sources of supply. However, this analysis currently minimizes the role of non-potable water. As long as we're using 40% of our water outdoors, we need to be matching our supply of non-potable water to the demand. And we need to invest in supply and distribution of non-potable water to meet this demand. It's worth remembering that recycled water is drought proof, and that goes for the revenues that come with it. Finally, watershed management fee, I don't think should be volumetric. If anything, stress on the watershed is higher during times of drought, and that's when the district would be encouraging folks to use less water. That means revenue based on volume will drop just when it needs to increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sauter. Clayton Smith, please, and then Ed Jameson.
I'd like to say that I think that this 1 minute limitation in the conduct of this public comment period is a travesty. And that odious bell that you're ringing is an insult to all the people that are attempting to make their opinions known. And the bell that you're ringing at the end of it just doubles down on your lack of respect for the public. That cowbell that you've got going on there reminds me of the bell that they used to ring at the Politburo when people were given the permission to stop clapping. When Comrade Stalin was basically preaching from the pulpit. So I think that given the small number of people that are commenting tonight, you could have at least allowed 2 minutes. That would have been certainly respectful. Thank you.
Mr. Ed Jameson, please.
Yes, I'd like to express my support for the proposed price increases. I'd also like to acknowledge the quality of MNWD's staff, as we've seen tonight in the presentation. We really do have outstanding people providing our water, and I believe we have an equally outstanding board of directors to ultimately make the most critical decisions. The district has significant past due maintenance to deal with, inflationary cost up needs, catch-up needs, overdue protection from earthquake risks, and it needs to proceed with securing new drought supply sources. And we need to quit kicking the can down the road for the next 2 generations of Marin homeowners to pay for our insufficiently maintained water infrastructure. For customers who need relief from the price increases, the district has programs to help them. I commend the district and the board for having the courage to do what's needed to assure our future supply of water. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Ms. Barbara Solomon, please, and then MK Anderson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, this whole process has been so undemocratic. I am really ashamed of the Marin Municipal Water District. By limiting us to 1 minute, you are cutting off public comment. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I opposed the capital improvement fee a few years ago. That was a joke of a hearing. You obviously don't care about your ratepayers. You just are there to like charge more money. I don't understand. Where are the new members of the district board? I'd like to hear from them. Do they agree with all these rate increases? What good did it do to elect new members of the board? You never justified the capital improvement fee, and this process is undemocratic.
Thank you, Ms. Solomon. Next is MK Anderson, then MK Anderson, please.
Yes, hi, good evening. I would like to say first and foremost, thank you to all of the speakers that walked us through the material. I do have one comment that actually was the first time I had heard somebody comment on not having enough information in the mailer. I actually went to the website to try to find other data based on the mailer, but got nowhere. So I think as much as humanly possible, making these types of reports and slides available is paramount to us. I think the second thing I really want to get across is, as a 2-year Marin resident, I'm actually shocked that this is how the division of water has been running, and how now they haven't been taking care of things for 40 years and want to try and fix it in 4. It's not realistic.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Next is Mimi Willard. Okay, after Ms. Willard is 1402, then AF. Go ahead, 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. The problem with this rate increase can be summed up in 4 words: too much, too soon. A case can be made for some increase, but not this humongous boost. This increase seems intended to finance a wish list years in the making that's more aggressive and all-encompassing than realistic and reasonable for ratepayers. Christmas in July for Marin Water. Compounding that concern is the concurrent lack of concrete plans for new water supply. The new board is bringing us a rate increase, but no supply increase. Some ratepayers may have buyer's remorse about the results of last year's election. Far-reaching changes in both rate levels and rating methodology are a 1-2 punch that leaves the average ratepayer dazed and confused. Please slim down this bloated increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is AF, and then after AF is Stephen Burke. Go ahead, AF.
Hi, Arlene Fox, longtime resident of Larkspur. There are 2 very significant negative environmental impacts that will result of rate increases. I suspect wealthy residents will drill wells, exacerbating groundwater extraction, thereby reducing the groundwater table. 2, homeowners will install more rock and mulch yards and plastic lawns, which will further increase the heat index and reduce CO2 capture, thereby accelerating climate warming. 3rd, North Marin Water District was not included in the slide comparing MMWD to other water agencies. It should have been. Lastly, MMWD has not demonstrated its cutting costs. Do like corporations do, cut 10 to 20% across all departments to eliminate waste before raising rates on customers. Thank you.
Ms. AF. Next is Stephen Burke, then Kim Gaylord. Go ahead, Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Stephen Burke, 22-year resident of Marin County, calling in to support the rate increase. For too long, we paid too little. for the water we enjoy. My primary concern is the deferral of AMI implementation and how that would actually help residents and the district alike have greater visibility both into their bills and usage and network performance for the water district. As a policy matter, I'd also like to see the board and the district work more on interconnectedness with our regional partners to come up with longer term solutions for water generation and storage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kim Gaylord, please, and then Francis.
Yes, hi, my name is Kim Gaylord. I've been a Marin resident since 2010, so I've been using and paying MMWD for 13 years. I wanted to congratulate you because MMWD bill will now be my most shocking bill. Yes, it'll be even more shocking than Xfinity or PG&E, so congratulations on winning the utility craziness. I attended your February customer workshop, and honestly, I'm not sure you took much feedback to make your new plan. You're just taking the legal steps to implement your new rate increases. I'm concerned these rates are out of line, and it's sad that we're in this situation because MMWD has been mismanaged, and now the customers will have to pay even more to deal with your poor management and lack of maintenance. Meanwhile, the customers are doing their part, conserving water and doing what you've asked us to do. The rate increase for temporary drought and water surcharges based on the water levels as of April 1st each year is a big concern. How do we know you will not manipulate or control these water levels to be sure to hit the next bracket at reservoir levels for you to propose a rate increase?
Thank you. Miss Francis Rappaport, the Jess, please.
Yes, so I am also a longtime resident of Marin, and I am not in favor of the rate increase. I think that the way you presented your financial data is really sloppy and obscured a lot of differences, for example, addressed by Todd Silverstein. So I just want to say that I'm against this proposal, and to save you time, I won't say anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Jess, please.
Hi there. I just wanted to echo what others have said, and I won't use a lot of time, but the speaker who spoke about this being pared down and not being an all at once effort, I really appreciated what he said and agree completely. This is too much too soon, but there are certain things that need addressing, but it doesn't have to be this way. And something I said earlier when I was logged in and then logged out, so I'm glad I got a chance to come back in, that no one else has mentioned is the ridiculous issue where you can't receive emails or these public comments and take them or count them as protest. It seems to me that we are in an age where everyone is using email. The law that you're talking about, Prop 218, was from 1996. That's 27 years ago, and saying that we are required to send written comment or drop it off is really ridiculous, and that you should count our emails. So I object to the rate increases, but also would support a plan that we could follow and understand what you're doing with the money and how you're using it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Nancy Abido, then Pamela Meeks. Go ahead, Miss Nancy Abido. Okay, Pamela Meeks, please.
Hi, can you hear me? Because
who's this?
This is Pamela Meigs.
Hi, Pamela, go ahead.
I am totally against the increase. I'm also elected on the Ross Valley Sanitary District. And instead of having
I apologize. I'm so sorry. Let me, if you don't mind, if I may bring her back on. I apologize. Hold on, Miss Pamela Meeks. Okay, I apologize. Go ahead. Please repeat, and I apologize for that.
Good evening, everyone. I am against the rate increase. I think for a lot of us who are middle income and seniors, there's 30% seniors in Marin County. I think you should spread this out and not make it so much at once. It's shocking. And, you know, I also am elected on the Ross Valley Sanitary District, and we actually took out bonds not to impose so much rates on people. And it seemed to be a lot easier and not to the point where people were just freaking out. So I would ask you to go back to the table and look at that, and you think about bonds and other ways you can cut costs. Please don't ring the bell for me at 15 seconds. I'm an adult and I can figure it out. Please go back to the drawing board and review this more carefully and look at ways you can actually cut costs. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speakers are Ann Thomas, then Lynn. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas. Ms. Ann Thomas. Okay. Lynn, please. Can you unmute yourselves, please? Lynn or Ann Thomas?
Okay, hello,
Hi,
this is Lynn.
Hi,
Hi.
Lynn.
Got it.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Ann Thomas. Hi. I'm just following up on some comments that were made regarding employee compensation. To caution that in establishing the new rate structure, I hope you would not be sidetracked into a debate on hiring compensation practices, while concurrently, presumably, you are also trying to hire the most qualified people for any given task. In today's market, these are people who are going to have other options for employment, and anything unrealistic restrictions would not be in the public's best interest. And I do support the proposed rate hike, by the way. Thanks.
Thank you. Lynn, please.
Yes, hello. Can you
Hello.
hear me? Hi. I am against the rate increases being so fast. I don't know why there's not a moratorium on pools and all pools emptied. I can't water my vegetable garden because somebody else can have a mega house with lots of lawn and a pool. It doesn't make sense. I've been here for over 70 years, third generation. We wanted that pipe saved over Richmond Bridge. We're paying for bad management, and it's not fair. The tier change is too much. We depend on our vegetable and fruit garden. We actually provide food for other people that are needy in our neighborhood. And I think it's a big mistake. I think the pensions have to go. That's old school. It's not happening now. And I think it's a disservice to seniors. And we've been conserving water since the 60s. The 60s. There's no more, we can't save anywhere else. It's ridiculous that somebody else can have a pool.
Thank you, Lynn. The next speakers are Urban, Carmel, Mill Valley, then Ann and Tricia. So go ahead, Urban, Carmel. I've unmuted you.
Great. I hope you can hear me. I'm in favor of the rate increase. 3 of the directors of MMWD were recently elected. That's a mandate. You have a mandate to respond to the voters' requirement that you increase the supply of water in Marin County. And you are doing exactly what you set out to do, what you told the voters you would do. And I applaud you for taking this bold step to increase the rates so you can go ahead and increase the supply of water. There's no way that you can increase the supply of water without increasing your revenues. And so you're taking the right step. And I wish you well with this. And thank you very much for your leadership.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker is Ann. Hold on, let me change the clock here. Go ahead, Ann.
Hi, I am a 40-year resident and a newly retiree at 71. I have done everything in my power to so reduce my water usage that I'm one of the lucky people who get a credit every month. But that's at a great sacrifice that we no longer grow vegetables, my roses are dead, and we eliminated our lawn. And feel insulted that when I asked Marin Water to help with the mulching, sheet mulching, I was told that, well, I already got rid of my lawn, so I don't qualify. But this rate hike, I think, is too much, too fast. I'm wondering why we can't stretch the tiers out as well as the time. And I would certainly like Marin Water to look at tightening their belt as we all are in this economy. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next is Tricia, then Elizabeth Singleton. Go ahead, Tricia.
Hello, my name is Tricia Hall. I've lived in this county for almost 30 years.
For about 20 of those years, I've grown vegetables and shared them with friends, neighbors, and needy individuals. I do not support this rate increase. I also do not support the lack of clear communication by the water district. The article on Sunday's front page was disingenuous by putting in extra information and disingenuous, incorrect information about the amount of the raise. The double impact of increasing our rates so dramatically, as well as reducing the amount of water we can use at that point, results in a double rate increase. This just feels abusive, that you are being abusive to us as Marin residents because you haven't done your job. Thank you.
Patricia. The next speakers are Elizabeth Singleton, then Mimi Willard. Go ahead, Ms. Singleton.
Thank you. Thanks to the board for the work and the staff. Great job. I have to say that I am shocked that the presentation didn't address pension issues. And I think that has to be addressed before you could push this kind of rate increase. I'm incredibly supportive of addressing deferred maintenance. I just don't understand why decades of deferred maintenance are being pushed into 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Singleton. And the next is Mimi Willard.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Two quick comments. Number one, I just would like to point out that the smart meters that I spoke of previously, they are what's referred to here as AMI, and it is in your budget for over 20 million. By the time it actually is implemented, that will probably be over 30 million. That's relative to a current operating budget that's in broad sense in the $100 million area. And so while that won't all be spent at once, that gives you a sense of size. Fixed costs in the private sector, personnel costs aren't fixed costs. And for you, they are fixed costs. That's government accounting. But you shouldn't consider them to be fixed because you can adjust the level of your employees in the amount that you pay them. So I would submit that those are not fixed costs.
Thank you. Next we have Patricia Warnock.
Yes, this July, it will be 79 years that I have been in Marin. And I feel that this entire 4-year program that you've set up with a 58% increases and even more acceptable. And furthermore, I think that you need to have more public input on this. And I would like you to simplify all of the data, the very important scientific data that you gave tonight. I want you to simplify it for the rest of the people in Marin County. It's very complicated. We need to know what it is. And I'm aghast at these rates. This is out of the question. And the man who's only paying $100 for his water, you better check his water meter. I think it's malfunctioning.
Thank you. Next, we have Barbara Salzman, then Cliff Indoff. Go ahead, Patricia.
Barbara, you mean?
Oh, Barbara, I apologize.
Yeah, I would like to express my support for your plan. I think our water has been far too cheap for many years. My only complaint is that I think you should have a bigger discount than $8 for the lowest tier water users. But good job and a very thorough plan.
Thank you. And Cliff Indoff, please. I've unmuted. You're speaking.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name's Clifford Waldeck. I've been a 40-year Marin County resident, and I also serve on the Water Committee of the Bay Area Council, and I was also on the Mill Valley City Council for 8 years, and I'm completely in favor of the proposed plan. I think it's well thought out, And I conserve as much as I can. And it also helps preserve our world-class watershed, which could be like a national park. And I want to applaud my board member for his accessibility and openness to discuss this with anybody in our district anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And next is George Lando.
Yes. I'd like to suggest that we do a marketing plan to encourage people to drink this amazing water that you produce for us every day at pennies a gallon, instead of spending probably $4 a gallon buying this stuff in grocery stores. I think if we did that, if we considered water as a beverage, not just as a gardening vehicle, then your cash flow will improve. Your relationship with the Marin 199,000 people will improve, and some of the goals will be accomplished, particularly the building up of the reserve.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sam Robinson, please. Sam Robinson?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I've been in Marin County for about almost 2 years now next month. I'm still learning some of the ins and outs of the county. I mostly agree with the proposal, but from what I observed tonight, I would say there just wasn't enough hard statistics, particularly with current uses versus future uses. So that's a little confusing for me, particularly for myself. I can speak for myself in terms of my income, making less than 60,000 a year. That's going to be kind of difficult with that kind of increase for me to pay. So I don't know. I guess I could look at it from like, yeah, I could get the assistance programs too, I guess, but it seems a bit much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Let me try one more person here, in case Basia Crane didn't hear. Is Basia Crane here? Okay, okay, and then Rick Flores. I'm going to unmute you, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Rick Flores.
Yes, however much you raise the rates and however fast, it is unfair to the tier system needs to be based on the number of people using the water from every meter. So it is unfair that a single person using the water from a meter is allotted the same amount of water as a family of 5. You need to restructure the tier-based system so that the number of people using the water is incorporated into the tier structure. So the basic unit should be a person rather than a meter. So family of 5 should get 5 times the amount as a person, one person using the meter. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. And I believe, if I may, that concludes all my speakers, sirs.
Okay. Well, thank you for everyone who provided comments this evening. And we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we're going to come back and have some responses from staff and comments from the board. Okay, folks, we've returned. So we have we've closed our public hearing, and now we're going to have a chance to have staff respond to some of the comments that we've heard.
Thank you, President Schmidt. I'll start, and there's a few of us will provide some clarifications. There were some comments on what are you doing for grants, and I wanted to share with the board is you're pretty aware in the public that over the last few years, we've been very successful with grants. We've revamped kind of our grant program internally. We have brought on board some lobbyists to help support our efforts in Sacramento and DC. And in fact, we currently have over $70 million in a variety of grant applications, much of which that we do expect will be successful, but time will tell. So a very strong grant program, particularly for an agency this size. I also wanted to touch on, there were understandable comments on what have you done to tighten your belt or cost savings. I wanted to speak to that a bit. During the drought and following the drought, as our revenues dropped, as you saw in Brett's presentation, we did put a hold on filling non-critical positions, and that percentage over time got close to 20% of our positions. And really, it reached a point of almost decimating the organization in terms of we're very lean in terms of knowledge transfers of folks that were retiring and really starting to feel the ability to provide service. And then we had associate overtime. So that was really not a sustainable, but it was effective, I suppose, in the short term, as was a significant reduction to our capital program to save some money. Of course, you defer some capital investments. You don't get rid of them. You just defer them, and we need to catch up. Going forward, there's many initiatives that we're looking at, ways to save money in the long term, range from things like we're currently still under a pilot to close our front office, our customer service office on Fridays. And so far, it looks like that's going pretty well. We're looking at our laboratory. Currently, it's a full service laboratory. Are there certain analysis that we don't need the expertise? We don't need the equipment. It's only done once or twice a year. That effort's going forward. We're looking at targeted where it makes sense, where it makes business sense of using managed services to augment our staff. One area we're currently doing that is some areas in our IT. So this is just a sense. It's almost every area of the organization we are looking at. How can we be more efficient, effective in ways that provide long-term strength and stability for the organization? So with that, I wanted to turn to Brett. He had some other issues. He was going to provide some clarification on items that came up tonight. Brett.
Thank you, Ben. And one of the notes or one of the common themes from the public comment here was the district's pension costs. I think it's not something lost on me as a financial director here. It is a significant part of our budget. And so we are always looking at our pension liabilities and projecting out future costs. What I would say to that is there's been more of a good news story lately than bad news, in the sense that our unfunded liabilities have come down by over $20 million in the last year, largely, I would say, due to investment earnings at CalPERS. So the point of that is that the big movements in our pension costs are out of our control. They are with CalPERS in the stock market, and I think CalPERS has done a lot in the last 10 years to smooth out the impacts of those rates on public agencies. They have a pretty robust, 5-year smoothing plan that really lets us plan more proactively and kind of have a little bit more of a forecast for how much they're going to cost us. I would also say the implementation of PEPRA back in 2013, it puts us on a good trajectory over the long term. Nothing changes overnight. We do have a lot of legacy benefits that must get paid, but PEPRA really puts us, for all our new employees, on a trajectory for lower costs. Every time we hire a new employee as a PEPRA employee, they're less cost to us going forward. So that improves our efficiency and lowers our costs over time in terms of pension rates. Another point that was brought up a couple of times is our bonding capacity. And so I think with our bonding capacity, we have certain limits in both imposed by our own policies and as well as by the market for who would issue a bond to us. I think there's two key metrics in that. Number one is your current operating income. So first of all, you have to be able to be making more money than you're spending. And right now we're not. And so in order to take out any bonds going forward, we have to at least fix that operating deficit that we showed there in the first couple of slides. And I think secondarily, we want to be very targeted and strategic about which projects we think are best candidates for bonds. And so the rate proposal that we have included addresses up to 2 large projects in year 3 and 4 that we think are appropriate for bonds, given their size and given their intergenerational impacts and benefits. And I think we would like to also entertain discussions with the board over the next couple of years, and certainly as we get into the next rate cycle, for what types of water supply projects would be most appropriate for bonding capacity. So that's a way of saying I think we want to be very targeted, and we want to be sure that when we do go out for bonds, there are projects that best match the district's profile and the long-term benefits. So the rate proposal does put us in a very good position by year 4 to be able to make that discussion or that decision. It'll increase our overall bonding debt service coverage ratio from what now is very close to our limit of 1.25 into the 300% range. And so it'll give us a lot of options by that 4th year to be able to convert any of these larger expenditures to bonding expenses. Finally, not finally, but I also noticed a comment or two on the aggressive nature of our water rate structure. And I think that was something, again, we took a hard look at that with the analysis of our consultant and with the analysis of the impacts on all the different customer classes. And that was largely what drove our focus on reducing fixed fees, because more than anything else, reducing fixed fees impact, more aggressively on the overall customer profiles than anything, right? If you can't control your costs, and if you're forced to pay a cost before you've even used any water, that by definition can be regressive. And so by lowering our fixed fees, not only now, but going forward over the next 4 years, it actually makes our system less regressive over time. And then, when we talk about the regressive nature of any utility bill, I think that's why we have such a robust income discount program based on income. So low income discount program. That is paid by our non-rate revenue. And so it's revenues that are raised by the district for other things, not through rates. And as I mentioned, we do have one of the more robust low-income programs. The beginning qualifications for that are just over $80,000, whereas other districts in the 40s or $60,000 for a family of 1. And by the time you get to a family of 4, we're closer to $120,000 for our limit. So we would like to see more uptake and more participation in that program. And so we're trying to make sure we do our best to get the word out on the benefits that are available to our customers. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Molly to talk more about some of the items that she was hearing.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, I would like to touch on the question about how protests are submitted. I know we heard a lot of people saying that they would like them to be able to submit protests by email. Really, that's not a practice that's undertaken. We do need those to be in writing. We do need to know that we are receiving them, and we need them to be verifiable. So the common practice and the conservative practice is to make sure that we receive them by asking that people submit them in writing, either by hand or by mail. And we do provide information about that in the way to submit protests in our Prop 218 mailer, which went out more than 45 days ago. So there's plenty of time for people to partake of that. I think also I'd like to speak about the way that we tried to get information out on the process for our rates. We really did work very hard to hold community workshops and to share information as we were going through the rate process. In the staff report, page 3 of the staff report lays out all of the public meetings that we had. Some of them were committee meetings, some of them were regular board meetings. In addition, we had 4 public workshops. One of those was fully virtual so that people could attend from anywhere. And the amount of information on the webpage, and when I went on the webpage, there's a banner across the top, learn about our rates. We really did want to make that available and accessible. Our COSA is there, our Prop 218 mailing notice that we sent out to all our customers and property owners in the district is there, in addition to frequently asked questions and answers to those. So I do believe that the district worked extremely hard to educate the customers and to make sure that they had the information necessary to participate in the process.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, that brings us to,
With that, President Schmidt, did you want to formally close the public hearing, and then I could give the protest count if you're ready for that?
yes, please. So we are formally closing the hearing and I'll,
Very
Okay.
formal.
thank you. Okay, and with that, can you use the
Yes.
protest count?
So we did, the district provides water service to 56,178 parcels within the district. Therefore, a majority of the owners of the identified parcels that receive service or subject to the rates would equal 28,090. Valid written protests received by the close of the public hearing this evening was 599. Therefore, a majority protest does not exist, and the board may consider adopting the proposed ordinance with the rate proposals.
Thank you so much, Molly. Okay, with that, board comments. Larry, do you want to start?
Oh, I'd like to say thank you for all your hard work. I know it's been a grind, and I'd also like to say to the public that I hear you and am empathetic to the complaints. So with that, I'll pass it on.
Well, I think it's important to note that this board and the staff did not make this decision flippantly, that we didn't make it lightly, that raising rates is never popular. And I also think it's important to note that our residents have been benefiting from fairly remarkably low rates for decades. With that said, we walked into our position, at least for me, less than 6 months ago, to an agency that's losing $1 million per month, that has over 24 unfilled hires, not able to do the work that needs to get done, an aging infrastructure that is in need of drastic repair. And this is a board that's willing to make some difficult decisions and hopefully set ourselves up for a future that will meet our community's important needs to have safe, clean drinking water and this remarkable watershed that we're here to protect. It's a frugal agency, and I'm super impressed by the finance team and the management for how they have combed through every line item on this budget. And they're looking to save in any way that they can. If we did not raise rates, we would not be able to raise any money with debt capacity or bonds. We needed to make a move. Otherwise, that we would not be solvent. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that. I agree with the comments that is important to have gardens. That's important to have, to have pollinators in our yards, and you can use some water, but you can do it efficiently. You can use native plants and native species and be thoughtful about it. And I have 5 people in my house, and we're less than $100 a month. And we have a lovely set of native, low water, drought tolerant plantings. And if you're thoughtful, the MMWD website has some good advice about how to go about that. I just want to reiterate the importance of our low income access to grant monies available for people that can't afford it or have concerns. It's one of the most generous in our county, and I encourage people to go after it. I'd like to make a comment about AMI and the comment that was made earlier about East Bay Mud not moving forward with their implementation. I think that is a partial set of information. In fact, I believe that East Bay Mud just got approval to have grant money for over 40,000 new AMI installations. And they're not alone. It's not just East Bay Mud that we should be looking at. And I've sent to the staff, and I hope they send it to the whole board, information that AMI is being implemented in Alameda, in Santa Cruz, in Mountain View, in North Marin Water, in Novato, SFPUC, and more. There's a lot of information out there. And I think there's only been a limited set right now, but I'm glad to see it, that it's a part of the budget.
I think my last comment is that we're still working on the budget. So we still have a few more months to go. I still think there's some thoughtfulness that we can bring in to making sure that our watershed and our land is thoughtfully invested in. It seems to me from the last presentation, we're slightly below where increasing the investment in the watershed than the rest of our operations investments, and maybe we can shift some money in that direction. And similarly on water efficiency efforts, it looked to me like we were fairly low on that compared to others. And so in the coming weeks, I hope we have a more detailed view about how we can look at some of the other line items of the budget and maybe shift some funding around. Overall, I just want to thank this team for working so hard, for doing these dozens of public meetings, workshops, and board meetings and presentations. This is not an insignificant undertaking. I'm proud to be working with you all.
Thank you. Rajiv?
Thanks, Monty. So today is May 16th, 2023, and we're having an important discussion regarding a proposal for substantial increases in amounts that MMWD customers will pay for water services. As I was thinking about this meeting, I thought it'd be helpful to consider some of the history that brought us to this discussion. So I went to the newspapers and started looking up articles from May 2021, 2 years ago. On May 1st, 2021, the IJ headline read, "Marin drought brings echoes of 1976-1977 drought." That article takes us back then further in history to a really difficult time in Marin when MMWD actually ran out of water. So in 1977, our United States Congress, so this is national, this is not state, had to bail us out by funding an emergency pipeline across the San Rafael-Richmond Bridge because we were not prepared for severe drought. Now, I think that 76-77 drought is an important piece of MMWD's history that we don't want to repeat. And to understand why, I urge all of you to take a look at this book. The Man Who Made It Rain by Michael McCarthy. It tells the story through the eyes of the MMWD GM at that time, Dietrich Stroh. And I'd like to read just one short quote from the book. Marin County, California is a prosperous community of highly educated people, adept at solving their own problems. But during a period of 25 months, in 1976-77, a curious event occurred that no one could fix. It didn't rain. Since Marin is not connected to the state water system, the drought evolved into a critical emergency. No matter how rich you are, money doesn't make it rain. And that's right, money doesn't make it rain, but strategic investments will improve the reliability and efficiency of our water supply. Strategic investments will ensure that we are managing water demand and improving the environmental sustainability of our water supply. Strategic investments will support the health of our watershed and reduce wildfire risk. Strategic investments will mean we can maintain excellent, high-performing staff. Strategic investments will enable us to increase our water supplies. All of these strategic investments together will ensure that the next drought doesn't remind anybody of 1977. Now, the rate increases that we are considering here, as we have heard, are hard, but they are needed to support these strategic investments. I believe that we must take this difficult path so that once and for all, MMWD can get out of the ongoing cycle of water shortages and to make sure that we are all well prepared to face the risks to our water supply and environment that are definitely in our uncertain climate future. I'd like to thank all of the staff for working with us for the last 6 months on this process. I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of respect for what you do. I hope the public sees.
Yes, and excuse me, to follow up on Director Cush's comments first, I think and foremost, a big thank you to the entire staff for everything you've done. Ben, Molly, Crystal, and then of course, Brett, the time and effort you put in to make this process as successful as I think it is, does not go unnoticed. And I think the detail you put into it to make sure that we're requesting monies for what we really need is also appreciated. To the comments about the transparency of the process, wait till she gets back. I'd like to thank the communications staff as well, because I believe they went above and beyond what is normal for most public agencies to make sure that the public is well informed about this, including additional meetings. And this is going back now 5 months. Our first meeting on December 12th of last year was rates. And so we've been doing this now for some time, and we've not been trying to put anything in the back burner. So I think the transparency has been great. I'd also like to thank the public, both here and online tonight, and as well as the ones who have been attending meetings for the past 5 months. Your input's been appreciated. It's been taken and noted, and we appreciate the continued cooperation as we work through this rate process. I'm very pleased with the work the district staff has done, and I'm confident in the direction that this board has given to staff to making sure we're in a much better place. And I think this rate proposal is going to focus on the biggest threats we're facing, as well as ensuring the sustainability of our water department and for the next generation of our customers. And we're doing that through focusing on the modernization of a district that's 100 and something years old. We're going to be doing it by reducing our risk from wildfire, while at the same time protecting the fragile ecosystem we enjoy here in the county. And of course, we're going to be investing in our most valuable asset, as our employees, by putting in a training specialist to make sure that they have the ability to progress through the job here. Giving them the tools and equipment they need to do their job successfully is a big deal, and it's important. And of course, lastly, we're going to be doing this through the finding new sources of water. Like was just said much more eloquently than I'm going to say it, 2021 wasn't that long ago, and we are facing a much more dire situation, and we need to find new sources of water to make that happen. But all this together, I think, is a very ambitious plan. But I think it's one that's appropriately moving forward based on the urgency of our current situation, as I have no intention of burdening future generations with our problems that we can and should solve now. With this rate hike, we're going to be addressing real issues. And what it comes down to is allowing our district to be able to continue providing the best water quality we have here in the state of California. And listening to the radio station on the way to work this morning, there was a story on home daycares and water quality in home daycares throughout the state of California. And 1 out of 4, which was a shocking number, has higher levels of lead than permissible to consume. That's an issue we don't have to even consider here in this county because of the benefit of this district and what it provides. And if we want to continue that same benefit and that same luxury, we need to continue to invest in the system and continue to make it so that it's sustainable into the future. But during this process, I think, I'm proud of this board for being sensitive to everyone who's conserved water over the past few years. Our customers far exceeded the state average of conservation when we were asked to during incredibly dry periods. And this rate structure impacts those who conserve the least and those who use the least. But in that same token, we have and will continue to fund conservation practices to help people lower their water bill. We are going to give you money for items that will help you decrease your use and then therefore decrease your bill. But with this rate proposal, and I'll close with this, if approved, and this is something I support, I feel like we're starting a new chapter with the water district in its history. And it's a time I hope we can look back as an inflection and one where we're putting the district on a positive trajectory to move forward in a very sustainable way, one that allows us to modernize the district, make it more resilient, plan for a changing climate, one that we're all forcing to face, but also continue to protect the watershed and securing water for generations to come. So with that, President Schmidt, I support the rate proposal.
Thank you. Great comments. And I think I'll just, I will thank all the people who showed up tonight and people who have sent in comments. We may not agree. There's a lot of different opinions, but I think we all care. And I can say that there are many folks who have shown up in our committee meetings and our regular board meetings, and the commitment of their comments, their thoughtfulness of their comments, their analysis of our finances and our proposals really reflects a sense of the fact that our community really cares about its water as well as it should, because it is so foundational to the health and well-being of this place that we live. And the watershed that provides 80% of the water that we drink and provides such beauty that we want to live here. The quality of life that comes from our watershed that provides us our water. I want to thank the staff that has done an incredible amount of work and really express to the community that the board has really been active in this process, asking a lot of questions of the staff, probably annoying levels of questions, but we've taken our job very seriously as elected representatives to really try to understand in great detail what our needs are, what our strategies are for meeting our needs into the future. And considering many of the things that folks brought up this evening are things that we at times have thought about and considered. And I believe what we have come up with is really the path forward that makes the most sense. And that these investments that we are making now are really essential. Folks are concerned that maybe this is too much too soon. And I would say that with a backlog of maintenance of over $200 million, it is not too soon. It is actually really a dire situation that we need to be investing in. And even at the rates that we're investing in, it will take decades for us to catch up to where we would ultimately want to reside in, where we are maintaining our system at a level, I think, that is where we'd like to get closer to. So I don't think that we are going too fast, too soon. We really are trying to strike the right balance of making sure that we are taking care of our system so that it can reliably provide water at a reasonable cost. Cost was a very, very big concern for all of us, for the district, for the board. When coming up with the rate process, we really were asking ourselves, how will this impact our lowest consumers of water and our lowest income residents? And we've talked about the programs that we have that are the best in our region for providing cost relief to our low-income water users. We also were very sensitive to the fact that we wanted to make sure that our rate structure incentivized people to conserve, to reward them financially for conserving. And when we recognize the fact that the district has fixed costs for the water that we produce, we have costs that we just cannot escape. And with inflation that's been impacting all of us, but as we've heard, it's been impacting the district's materials and goods in ways that are higher than what we've seen in the news. And we can't escape that. And in that way, again, our rates and our financial plan going forward address that. We also we have got to deal with climate change. The way it has impacted us, the droughts that we've experienced have brought us to a great realization that we are dealing with extreme weather events that will generate extreme dry conditions that brought us to a very serious situation. In the first 2 years of my time on the board, we went from having something about 65% full reservoirs to about 32% full reservoirs, with a real serious concern that we could be, if another extreme dry year, we could look at running out of water. And the work that we quickly did to make sure that we would be prepared if necessary. But that extreme amount of action really reflected the way in which climate change is forcing not only our district, but districts throughout the United States, particularly in the dry western states, to have to do a lot of work now to be better prepared, to have greater resiliency. And that resiliency costs money. And that is part of what we also heard very clearly over the last 2 years, is that our community wants an investment in our water supply so that we do not have that level of risk. And that, again, is reflected in our rate structure and the plan that we have going forward. I know that there's a lot of concern about whether we are paying our staff too much. And it's a fair question to ask. I would just simply say this, that most of our staff cannot afford to live in our district. And so they have to travel from greater distances because of how expensive it is to live here. We all know that it's expensive to live here, and that's an impact on our staff. And we lose staff to other districts. If we were such a generous paying district, we wouldn't be losing staff to other districts. So we are very cost conscious. the board, whenever we are looking at a proposal to spend things, we are asking questions about is it the most cost-effective way that we can go at meeting that water supply need? And so we look at what we pay our staff. We want to retain good people. It's expensive to lose good people and have to rehire. And so I think we are mindful of being competitive, so we attract good people, but again, being cost conscious that we're not overpaying. And so with that, I think honestly, we have done a lot of really hard work here. I think this is a bold step, but I think our charge, I'll say from myself, it is my charge to make sure that I am doing what I can to help ensure that our district is on solid footing so that we can achieve our mission of safe and reliable and affordable water supply, not only now, but into the future. And the work that we are doing here to address our future water needs, I believe, means that we will be able to do that. So, okay, any other board comments? Okay, with that, I'm looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can I get a roll call vote?
Yes. Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
With all due respect, I've done a lot of thinking here, and I believe we have not achieved the affordability and equity issues that I've been talking about since we started all this. With that said, I vote no.
thank you. Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
And with that, we are adjourned.